It was getting harder and harder to breathe. The guy almost fainted from the overload, but he was still on his feet. There was a demon lying on the ground, looking at him with its black eyes, a trickle of blood coming out of the monster's mouth. Fury overwhelmed the boy, and he was ready to destroy the Hellspawn in one blow, but so far he had done nothing. The other demon stood on a tall structure and looked down on his opponent from above, without saying a word. On the monster's horrifying face was a smile. Black eyes glittered in the light of the fading sun. The hero looked at him with eyes full of rage, but for now he couldn't do anything. He was as if dumbfounded. Suddenly, the boy burst into heartbreaking laughter. The demon looked at him with surprised eyes. The unfortunate could not believe that he had been fighting only an illusion all this time. It was simply impossible. He felt humiliated. Suddenly he coughed, and blood spurted from his mouth. The strain had taken its toll, and his head began to blur. The demon had been chuckling the whole time. The guy had exceeded his expectations and had lasted far longer than possible. Almost 2 decades ago, they had hope that if they destroyed the Demon Lord, it would take them 22 years to get here. Here there was a beating everywhere. Monsters destroyed almost all the neighborhoods of this world, and only the hero fought to the last. Even when all his comrades went to the other side, he continued to fight alone no matter what. And when his strength had already left him, the boy tried to regain his abilities, slowly building up the level, and finally, personally, destroyed each one. And then at last, he met the Demon Lord face to face, and even then no one could prevent them. But in the end, it turned out that the hero was fighting only his illusion, and the real demon was watching the whole time. The boy opened the inventory panel and selected a weapon to finally send his worst enemy to the other side. A shiny sword appeared in his hands, which he immediately pointed at the demon with the purpose of finally destroying it. With a wave of his weapon, the guy created an energy wave flying directly at the demon that should help destroy it. But despite all the efforts of the enemy, remained standing on his feet and only laughed, looking at the hero impotently trying to destroy him. A smile reappeared on the toothy mouth of the demon. Really was impressed by such successes for him. It looked like a real entertainment. Fury consumed the hero's mind. He clenched his teeth in an attempt to contain his anger, but to no avail. He could do nothing against such a powerful demon. He shouted that he would never become his toy, but in his heart he realized that he had no chance to win. He asked for the monster to just destroy him and not make him suffer further. The demon continued to laugh. Much to the hero's surprise, the monster said he would leave this meeting for next time. He still wanted to have fun. The boy reached out to him, but the silhouette of the monster slowly began to dissolve into thin air, and soon there was nothing left of it. The boy shouted for the demon to stop and fight to the end, but alas, no one heard him. The boy only had to stand. The humiliated hero fell to his knees and could not say a word. He was exhausted from such a terrible battle and lost. The poor guy fell to his knees and started crying with tears glistening in his eyes. He was exhausted. I didn't know what to do next. Suddenly, everything around started to collapse with big rocks on the ground. The whole space started to shake. The guy started to spin what was going on, but all around was chaos and fire. He was standing here all alone. When he stumbled, he collapsed the vault beneath him and flew into the abyss, reaching out his hand as if trying to grasp it. Luckily, he survived and even gained new abilities. Now the guy looked completely different and much stronger than last time. In front of him was still the ruins. Demons and monsters had completely destroyed this city, and in the distance stood a black castle. December 31st, 2018. New York City lights were burning everywhere, illuminating the streets of the city. There were joyful faces of people everywhere. They were walking around the night city and enjoying their carefree life. There were a few people on the stage, apparently a group of musicians preparing to start their concert, and it was New Year's Eve. Everyone was celebrating. A few seconds later, the fireworks rang out and lit up the sky with bright flashes, giving people joy and shouts everywhere. On the computer screen was the monster, standing in front of the player and getting ready. There were skill and potion tablets everywhere. In front of us was a normal person's room with a computer desk chair and monitor on top, but it was empty. The White House stood on a beautiful lawn, neatly trimmed by a caring gardener. In this house, the most important state decisions took place. The man approached the office with a quick gait, as he was apparently anxious, as he was about to enter the office of the president himself. When he opened the door, he entered the office, and the president immediately asked why he was here, because it was New Year's Eve, and it was time to celebrate. The man looked at the head of state as if gathering his thoughts for a future conversation. Moving closer to the president's desk, he said he had an important message to deliver. The president looked at him with a surprised and at the same time frightened look. If this message required a personal meeting, it must be something serious. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a phone call like a thunderclap. The atmosphere in the office was tense. People were talking on the phone and dealing with important issues as something serious had apparently happened. The cops didn't know what to do. There were more and more missing people around the world, and they couldn't figure out what the reason was. When the woman went into her child's room, she was horrified to find that her child was missing. The room was empty, and a scream broke out. The lost child was crying in the crowd and could not find his father. People only waved their hands and did not understand anything. On a huge building monitor, a journalist was telling us that all over the world, many people were disappearing for no reason. The number of missing is about 100 million worldwide, but nothing is certain yet. In the Blue House in Japan, it was also tense. Government officials were trying to find out what was the cause, but so far, nothing was known. One of your men asked the leader, "Does he know anything about the eternal world?" The gray-haired man turned around. The assistant decided to explain it is an online game with virtual reality, and it is played by about 600 million people around the world. The man's eyes made even more frightened. He looked at the leader and gathered his thoughts. Still finding the right words, he said that all missing people played this game at the moment of disappearance. The leader stopped. There was a look of obvious fear on his face as he began to realize that the game was the reason for everything. Suddenly, the building shook with a powerful tremor. But it was strange now because everything was fine. The city was in total chaos, and panicked buildings were collapsing. People were screaming and fleeing to the safe place, but there was nothing they could do. Suddenly, monsters started appearing from somewhere. They looked just disgusting, like red goblins with scales. There was real shock and panic on people's faces. For the first time in their lives, they had encountered something like this in the real world. Monsters started attacking and destroying people one by one, and defenseless people could not do anything about it. The scientific staff has already started studying these monsters and developing weapons against them, but so far, even using everything they have, nothing has come out. Hearing the news that they had no success, the scientists were worried, and a real horror appeared on their faces. They didn't know how to keep people safe. Meanwhile, the city was in an inferno of buildings exploding, and screams of distraught people were heard everywhere. The government even had to involve the army to fight this evil. However, all was to no avail. Monsters were too many. A terrified soldier shouted into the radio that they were failing and needed reinforcements. The monsters were too many. But no sooner had he finished his sentence, as he saw that he was approaching several demons and already preparing to attack the man, was silent. A month after the appearance of these monsters, a tenth of humanity had been wiped out. The Earth no longer had any hope. It's been 2 months since the monsters appeared in the real world. Now Earth has changed beyond recognition. The world will never be the same again. A small child peeked out from around the corner and began to fearfully survey the surroundings in order to sneak away unnoticed. Still daring, he made a big dash and ran somewhere in the alleys to get away from the eyes of others. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed, and one of the demons noticed his new prey. The boy screamed but couldn't do anything. The man appeared just in time, and with one swing of the sharp ball destroyed the vile demon. Now the boy was safe. The little boy rushed to his father with tears and asked where he was all this time because he was so scared his father looked at him. The man crouched down beside his son and wondered what he was doing here. It was too dangerous to be left alone. The child grabbed his father by the shirt and dragged him behind him because the monsters would be back soon. We couldn't stay here. Several people stood near the mountain of bodies of these monsters. Why low-level monsters even appeared here was strange. The man dressed in military uniform smiled. They were just bugs, and it was no problem to deal with them. People started talking. They thought they were still in the game, but it seems they weren't. The same man appeared with the boy on his shoulder and smiled. Looking at his companions, the child seemed pleased too. With a smile on his face, the man announced that they were back, and they were fine with nothing to worry about. In the virtual world of the game, towered a huge castle in which a few windows were glowing. It seemed someone was inside. The same hero in the red suit fought monsters, destroying them by the dozens. For him, they were no danger. Swinging his weapon, he immediately destroyed several monsters that flew straight at him. The heroes did not notice that another demon is approaching him from on high and already preparing his powerful blow. The man opened the inventory panel and began selecting his gear that was best suited for the battle. A second later, a sword appeared in his hands. The blade glinted in the dim light, and the man swung the weapon with incredible speed. He destroyed several monsters at once, splitting them into several pieces, and a crackling sound was heard. The eyes of the hero burned with a bluish light. He looked threateningly. Seemingly, before this man, there were no barriers. Even though he was fighting hard, the monsters were becoming more and more numerous, and had already surrounded him, preparing to attack their prey. Somewhere up there appeared the painfully familiar silhouette of a demon. With big horns, Monster was watching everything from above. The small demons rushed straight at the hero, but the man used one of his skills, and a bright beam of blue energy hit the sky. Meanwhile, in the coastal city, chaos reigned as a huge tsunami approached right up to the buildings and was much taller than the tallest house. Paris was also in chaos. The Arc de Triomphe began to break under the onslaught of monsters and an earthquake. Singapore's main landmark was also destroyed due to the earthquake. The tower just exploded and collapsed on the city. One of the warriors held a spear in his hands and fought fiercely against the monsters, despite his low level. The volunteers who came out to confront these monsters destroyed them one by one despite their huge numbers. There were more and more people able to fight monsters. They were called players. These people made an invaluable contribution. While in the studio, a male reporter looked at the professor with a concerned look and asked who they really were. Professor Park Sang-jin looked at the man with serious eyes and said that they would understand everything by themselves now. All they managed to find out is that on New Year's Eve, the people who played the game Eternal World simply disappeared into the virtual world. The reporter still couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible. It seemed like some kind of stupid fiction. The professor squinted his eyes and said they haven't found the cause yet. However, since everyone is saying the same thing, it doesn't seem like a lie. And because of this, players had abilities that could help in battling the monsters that attacked this land. When they resided in the game, a year in the world passed. Just a month, reporters stared at professors. The man meaningfully raised his hand in the air and said that all these players had also parted with their lives in this game. At this time, on the ruins of the city, two guys were standing and fighting monsters. It seems like they were having good success. One guy asked his mate how long he had been playing this game. The friend said about 2 years. The kid lowered his head, so it's true that if you lose your life in the game, you go back to the real world. As far as the guy understands, only first and second year players can come back, the rest of us can't. Suddenly, a hideous monster with a long nose jumped on the unfortunate boy and wrapped his arms around him. The monster bit into his neck with its trunk and began sucking out the boy's energy, turning him into a skeleton. The comrade noticed too late that something was wrong with his friend, and there was nothing he could do to help. The monster just looked at the next victim with a baleful gaze. This monster was called Vicky and was level 2. There were also monsters circling the sky that were 3rd level Hugos, more like gargoyles and goblins. In the operations headquarters, work continued to boil in one of the cities. There was an overflow of monsters. It was a big problem. Due to the sudden increase in the strength of the monsters, they lose their positions on the faces of the people. Was horror, they were no longer in control of the situation. One of the soldiers asked the commander how many monsters appeared. The commander only looked at him angrily. He listened carefully to the male commander's head, saying that this happens when the mana of the negative dimension is overloaded. Several people desperately fought the monsters, but could not win. The number was unequal, and they were also lower in level. One of the monsters approached the man and had already brought his clawed paw to grab the victim before the man could react. Suddenly, the monster was split in half by a powerful blow. Someone saved them at the last moment. A teenage boy stood in front of them, holding a stick or a sword, and he didn't seem to understand what had happened. It was a 3rd-year player. The boy gave everyone a surprised look. He didn't know where he was or what they wanted from him. The scientist sat in front of a monitor screen and collected data. When players say goodbye to their lives, they come back in groups. In the city, there were horrible monsters. Slacker, lizard-like monster, and Vizzlestone-like monster. And in the sky, there were cloud-like monsters flying. The 8th-year player stood and watched what was happening. Behind him were several other heroes preparing for battle, and they already realized that the situation was serious. One of the heroes jumped up to the monster and hit it with his fire shot. The monster immediately flew somewhere far backwards. But they did not become less. They seemed to appear out of nowhere and attacked people with renewed vigor. A huge monster with an eye on its chest was walking through the city. It was Drain, a dangerous high-level monster that not everyone can handle. The hero in the red suit stood in front of the monster, who had already raised his hand for a powerful blow. But the man, in one deft move, released a shockwave at it, instantly incinerating the monster. Instead of the city was already ruins. Heroes, of course, tried to resist the monsters, but there were too many of them. The man walked around inspecting the remains of the city everywhere. There was smoke and the smell of burning. There was almost nothing left here. Only rare people walked the streets. The Masked Monarch was the name of the player, and approached the two people who immediately looked frightened upon seeing him. They looked admiringly at the man's armor, never having seen such a high-level player before. The monarch just looked at them from the sidelines. Soon, the boy was at his house in front of the door and stood for a few seconds as if hesitating to enter. He had many thoughts in his head. After seeing his hometown destroyed, it was hard on his soul. In the eternal world in Echo Canyon, a new monster has awakened a huge green demon with large horns on his head. In his memories, the monarch scrolled through the very moment when he and his brother had first encountered such a monster with his brother. Yoon Sang-hyuk ran forward at the monster and ordered his frightened brother to move back because he couldn't handle it. He jumped up to the expecting monster and drew his sword. The guy wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. With one sharp blow, he went straight into the monster's body, leaving a deep cut on the thick scales. The monster roared with rage and opened its wide maw. At the last moment, the guy noticed his brother being grabbed, but he couldn't help as he was too far away. Even so, Sang-hyuk rushed to his aid. The boy swung his sword and shouted with rage. He wanted to keep his brother safe. With just a single blow, the monster's arm began to unclench, releasing his brother's lifeless body. Sang-hyuk was almost in time. The unfortunate brother fell to the ground, and Sang-hyuk rushed straight to him. The case badly from the boy's mouth was bleeding. The monster managed to damage his internal organs, but the guy was still alive, and looking at his brother Sang-hyuk, tried to wake him up, but it was unsuccessful. Hot tears flowed down the boy's face as he lost the person who was most dear to him. Holding his brother's breathless body in his arms, the boy screamed, and his scream echoed throughout the ruined city. But in this world, everything was fine. His brother was alive and opened the door for him. Sangmin looked frightened. Apparently, the sight of his older brother had puzzled him greatly. Soon they were sitting in the kitchen drinking hot tea. The younger brother still couldn't believe that Sang-hyuk had been playing all this time. So it was all true that this player is the last one. They say they're all back. and that the world of this game will soon collapse at the end, leaving behind only ashes. Looking at his brother, Sangmin asked him what he thought the monarch had destroyed the demon lord. Hyuk twitched and hesitated. Even Richard Paulson, head of the American clan, said that the demon lord can only destroy the masked monarch. Responding to his brother's surprise, the guy said that you don't need to talk about everything all at once. After all, it takes time. As time goes on, even stronger monsters will appear, and it will be very difficult to cope with them. After Sangmin asked what level his brother had reached, he looked at him a little puzzled. Why such a question? In a joyful voice, Min said that he would like to invite him to the guild that he himself was a member of. She was from Korea. As soon as Hyuk heard the name of this group, something chilled in his soul. This group was destroying weak players and taking away their equipment. In the end, he had no choice but to exterminate these people so that they could no longer do such evil. And now his little brother is a member of this guild. Min looked at him and smiled. The boy seemed encouraged. After a bit of silence, Hyuk said that he wanted his brother to leave this guild immediately. Min fell silent and stared at him in surprise. The boy looked at him with a serious gaze. His little brother was only interested in what level Hyuk was. After a bit of silence, his older brother replied that he was now at his maximum level, which shocked the boy, who thought Richard was the strongest. To prove his point, the player opened the inventory to demonstrate what he could do. Min opened his mouth in surprise. Did his brother really have something so valuable? This was the first time he had ever seen an inventory. Putting on his trademark mask, his brother said he was the masked monarch, so don't let him be surprised. The younger brother opened his mouth in amazement at the monarch he had idolized all this time. Now, it turned out to be his older brother. On his face was a real shock. The boy even bounced a little aside. In fear, it was unusual to see someone like that in his home. He still couldn't believe that his own brother was the strongest in this world. Hyuk just looked at him and remained silent. So, that guild that Min joined was also exterminated by big brother Hyuk. Nodded he had to, because they caused too much damage. The boy still couldn't believe that his brother could use the inventory. After all the players who had returned had lost all their gear. All this time, the player didn't say a word. He just looked at his older brother's surprise. There wasn't a single emotion on his face. After learning that the reward for the last quest was the inheritance of the inventory guy, even more surprised to get the demon lord. Also, he exterminated. Hyuk answered with such ease, but Min seemed about to faint from shock. For the first time in his life, he had seen something like this. He was so happy to have his brother back, and now he's defeated the big boss. The boy was jumping around the room, unable to find his place. Hyuk suddenly said that he should make a gift to honor his return. Brother stopped jumping. The monarch opened the inventory and asked Min what level he was at, and the guy froze in place, not expecting such a turn. Recognizing that he was a 154th level monarch, stuck his hand into his inventory looking for the right item. Min couldn't believe his eyes. Senior's hand just disappeared into thin air, but the player explained that it was just a spatial inventory. Simply put, it is a large vault between dimensions that can hold many things. After digging into his inventory a bit, Hyuk pulled out 2 swords, Hamori's Will and Hamori's Fury, both of which had incredibly high attack power. Junior immediately grabbed them, and with astonishment began to consider it was a unique object such as simply could not be. Hyuk continued to look at the younger man and smiled, amused that his brother was so surprised. Looking at the shiny blade of the new weapon, Min continued to marvel. His eyes rounded. For the first time in his life, he had seen something like this. But a little closer look at the boy made him sad. He couldn't seem to use them. The requirements didn't fit. The strength wasn't enough to use such a high-end weapon, and true, the characteristics were impressive. Min said that he lacked 22 points of strength. The boy was so upset that he was ready to cry. He did not want to part with this weapon. His older brother started rummaging through his inventory, while Min just watched in amazement. It still seemed like some kind of fairy tale to him. A second later, from the inventory, came the items Lupus's ring and Sophia's bracelet and necklace, which just added the necessary amount. Min didn't even know what to say. He just stared at the gifts with a surprised and stunned look. In Japan, a man sat in his dojo and looked at a bright white sphere that began to glow with energy. Sphere suddenly started talking and asked if there was no one here. The man replied that these people are not known for punctuality. From the sphere, a voice was heard again. She asked, "What is the purpose of today's meeting?" After a little thought, the man replied that it seemed the masked monarch was back again. His voice trembled at that word. A woman's face appeared inside the sphere. The woman smiled and said that they basically expected it. Looking at the woman, Samurai answered that the person they needed was now in South Korea. The 2 brothers were walking down the street and talking. Min said his brother had no choice but to report to the players' department. Hyuk lamented the bureaucracy. There were quite a few players of different ranks, all of whom had different equipment, some better, some worse, and all of whom had returned. Hyuk asked where they got all this equipment, because when they return, all things are destroyed. Min sighed naturally. His brother does not know anything. After his brother explained that all of this was created in the real world, the monarch looked at him with surprise. The younger frowned and nodded his head. There are no rewards in their world. You have to create everything with your own hands. Production classes, magical engineers, and conglomerates work together to create magical equipment for heroes. But the things created here leave a lot to be desired. They are not even close to the equipment from the game itself. Looking at his brother, the monarch said he would like to see a man. Whether Min can find him is important. A few minutes later, the guys were at their destination. They were approaching a large building. He didn't want to come in here, but Hayuk was sure that this was the right place. With some excitement, Min asked, "Is it really his acquaintance looking at him?" the older man asked. "Does he really know him too?" The boy shrieked. Of course he knows. Who can not know? The Dusky Smiths are the most famous wizard. Although they are not a fighting class, but in the siege on the Demon Lord's castle, they were among the chosen ones. That's not all. Twilight Workshop is the place where the strongest players order their gear, which is famous for its quality. With admiration in his voice, the boy said that he had always wanted to purchase something from them. Smiling broadly, Hyuk replied that in that case, they would fulfill that dream, so it wasn't a problem. Inside waited a woman administrator with a good-natured voice, welcomed new customers, and asked how she could help. The guys replied that they were here to meet Lee Chul-woo now. The woman smiled and asked if they had an appointment. Min looked at his brother and asked if he was sure he knew the man smiling. Hyuk asked him to wait a moment. Going to the administrator, he asked where the main master is now. The woman said that, probably in his workshop. Hyuk stretched out the last words as if thinking about something. The receptionist looked at him with a surprised look. After that, the guy turned around and, to the surprise of his brother and the female administrator, ran somewhere in the back of the building. The receptionist tried to catch up with him, but the guy clearly was faster. He ran down the hallway and tried to find the workshop with his eyes. In the main production hall, there were many weapons on the walls, hanging axes and shields and armor of the highest quality. There were sharp katana swords and large cleavers designed to destroy monsters. To possess such weapons, everyone wanted. The master stood at his work and wound the thick cloth around his hand, with a serious expression on his face. Suddenly, someone called his name, and the man shifted their concerned look. Who dared to disturb him? Sang Hayuk. Standing in front of him and smiling, the boy was happy to see an old acquaintance. The blacksmith immediately cringed. Finally, the receptionist was able to catch up with him and was panting, saying that he would be in trouble if he acted like that. Laughing, the guy pointed his hand at the woman and said that it seemed she should be given a bonus for such a marathon. Besides, she said, "Where is the blacksmith?" The poor receptionist was speechless. Now she will definitely lose her job. The woman started to bow and apologize. This guy burst in, and without saying a word, ran away. But to her surprise, she heard Chul say in a calm voice that she would get a good bonus this month. Seeing the confusion on the face of the subordinate master asked, she did not want to get the money. The woman immediately waved her head. Soon, she disappeared, leaving the old friends alone. Chul breathed, "Loves this guy, certainly noisy." Hayuk wondered if he is not happy to see him. Suddenly, the man grabbed the boy's head and held him against him. Seemingly enraged, the boy couldn't break free of his grip no matter how hard he tried. But suddenly, the monarch pulled out a huge hammer from somewhere and showed it to the blacksmith. The man stopped in surprise for a second. Following that, almost falling off his feet, he bounced back. Could it really be the same young man? It couldn't be. Opening his eyes in surprise, Chul asked if the player had lost all of his belongings after the game was over. It was unthinkable. He smiled and replied that it was just a reward for destroying the final boss. So there is nothing to be surprised about. Also left, the blacksmith opened his eyes in surprise. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. It sounded like a fairy tale. Soon the man relented and thanked his old comrade. He certainly didn't expect to see his hammer again. But seeing something strange, the blacksmith looked closely at Hyuk, pressed against him, as if unwilling to give it back. The hammer belonged to him now. He had received it as a reward. So what could be the claim? But the blacksmith was surprised. Without any remorse, Hyuk said that he had taken this hammer from the lifeless body of his comrade. So now it belonged to him. As a token of their friendship, he would return. The hammer Chul looked at him with wide eyes and did not say a word, as if boiling over. Throwing the weapon on his shoulders, the boy smiled and said that in return, the blacksmith I would help him with something. Soon, the work began. The blacksmith put on his mask and started working on a new project that was taking up all his attention. He heard the door creak open and someone enter the room, and the man immediately grumbled, for there was a sign on the door saying no trespassing. Then the jingling of coins reached his ear. Someone tossed a weighty bag of money on his desk. The man even stopped forging on and stopped for a second. The sack was filled with jewelry mixed with gold. Apparently, the customer had spared no expense on new equipment. Taking off his mask, Chul looked at the payment with surprise. He was shocked. Did someone really have such valuable items? These are items of the highest quality. Looking at the silhouette of the stranger, the blacksmith asked who he was. The stranger said he needed one thing. The blacksmith frowned. And what kind of order was this? Why such a secret? He looked at the new customer with distrust. The monarch approached him and said that he needed a mask on the boy's face. A smile shone on his face. He was wearing red armor. Now Hayuk stood before the statues of two fighting knights. The boy wondered he didn't know his comrade had such a serious hobby. The blacksmith was already sitting at the table and grumbled that maybe the guy would stop staring and sit here with them after all. It's been a long time. Chul turned to the younger one and asked, "Is that his relative?" Min perked up and greeted the man. The boy's voice trembled. With obvious displeasure in his voice, the blacksmith said that unlike some clearly pointing at Hyuk, this kid is pretty polite. The monarch stepped closer and said that if the blacksmith continued to piss him off, he would turn around and leave Chul snorted at the childishness of it. The blacksmith asked, "What's the matter?" He cleaned up the world. Hyuk lowered his eyes. He said he thought he did, but he really didn't. He spent 2 years fighting different monsters and finally defeated the demon lord, but it wasn't that easy. It turned out that it was only his illusion. He had been fighting the illusion of the main boss all along. Chul listened, and his eyes grew increasingly somber. Suddenly, hearing his gloating laughter, the monarch raised an eyebrow and looked at his acquaintance in surprise. The blacksmith continued to laugh. He couldn't believe that the masked monarch himself couldn't tell the difference between a normal illusion and his opponent. Min Po hurriedly reassured his brother and said that the most important thing was that he had returned with incredible rewards, but the older man still didn't seem to have enough. Scratching his chin, Chul thought about it even though he laughed at his old friend, but what he said sounded quite serious. Leaning back in his chair, the man asked what the guy wanted to ask him, apparently something important. Smiling, the monarch said that he would just come here from time to time, so let the blacksmith let him in out of turn. A clearly disgruntled Chul was about to send the old acquaintances away if they had said everything they wanted to say. He had a lot of work to do. But that wasn't all. Hugging his younger brother, the monarch said he wanted to forge an armor for him. Just don't let them tell anyone. Smiling, the blacksmith said that it was a matter of a few hours, so he'd do it in the best way possible. With the same smile on his face, the man had already demanded his hammer back, but suddenly half-heartedly. Before he could say anything, a heavy hammer flew into his hands, and Chul was barely able to stay on his feet to avoid falling down, but he was used to such heavy weapons. With resentment in his voice, he shouted why he should have dropped it, but the monarch didn't seem to mind. The hammer wouldn't crumble if dropped. Stroking the hammer, the blacksmith said that his friend had never been known for his eloquence, but suddenly, it was as if he saw something. It came to him too late to realize that he was not level appropriate for this weapon, and what he would do with it was the 100th level he had not reached. Trying to smooth things over, the player stuck his hand into the spatial inventory. He tossed several items in front of the blacksmith, apparently increasing the level to the required size. There was Kerbo's gauntlet, Aaron's bracelet, and Vignette's crystal. These items were just perfect to match the blacksmith's level to the hammer. Despite all this, the man exploded with frustration again with this, and it was worth starting. Hyuk only chuckled quietly. He liked it when his comrade freaked out. Min asked his brother what it even was. The monarch replied that it was an artifact of the Twilight blacksmiths called an unsightly hammer. Not only is there no better tool for a true blacksmith, but the young one has an incredible amount of abilities. To use the ability, the strength must be above 200. With irritation in voice, the blacksmith said, "Of course I hate to admit it, but Hyuk is incredible." Smiling, Junior asked, "Is the masked monarch really that cool?" He had listened to the stories, of course, but not that cool. Smiling, the blacksmith said that in that world, the masked monarch was able to turn any opponent into dust. The sight of him took my breath away. He could make the impossible possible. He destroyed a dragon that had devoured many people and saved everyone he could. He was the one who solved all hopeless situations. For him, nothing was impossible. Then turning around to the boy, the blacksmith grimaced. If only he hadn't taken him on that raid, then all was well. Min asked the man, "Does he hate his brother?" The blacksmith laughed. If he wanted to, he couldn't do it even so. Hyuk took the mask out of his hands and showed the younger man it was a chaotic monarch mask. It looked menacing. Squinting, Hyuk said that it was Twilight blacksmith Chul who made such a cool thing. When the boy came closer, he asked about the castle in Seoul. Min wondered why his brother was suddenly asking about the castle. Hearing those words, Chul even opened his eyes in astonishment. Wait a moment. The man was even more surprised that this kid wasn't going to go there again. His eyes widened more and more, and the surprise overwhelmed the man. However, the masked monarch has already made up his mind. Naturally, if he's back, it's time to act, which is exactly what they thought. Several soldiers dressed in body armor and carrying weapons were on duty near the military facility. The guys passed by and wondered how many guards there were hiding there since they had so many soldiers. Min replied that they can't let their guard down and allow overflow. The situation is serious. The authorities are just taking insurance just in case. They did not have time to go any further as a military officer appeared in front of them and blocked their way. Min grabbed his older brother and started pushing him aside instead of just passing by, but the monarch wouldn't back down. Soon, they approached the castle from the other side of the castle. Wasn't the National Museum of Korea here before, but now it was some kind of military facility. Soon, the two brothers returned to the forge back there. The master was waiting for them, and it was time to make the second move. Chul looked at his old acquaintance with astonished eyes and wondered if he had decided to do it so quickly. Capturing a castle is no easy task, but it seems the monarch was determined. He didn't say a word, but this silence was eloquent. Visibly startled, Min asked what they were talking about for a moment, and there was silence. Smiling, the blacksmith replied that the monarch had somehow decided to take over the vampire castle that was in play. Min raised an eyebrow in surprise. He looked at his older brother and asked if it was true, but it was hard to believe. The blacksmith continued. They don't think it's over with just one castle takeover. Min opened his eyes even wider. Instead of destroying the vampire queen, he made her his slave, even changed her name to Castle of the Mask. Wanting to stop this gossip, Hyuk repeated his question. So what about the locks? Did they really appear in Korea? The blacksmith nodded affirmatively after a bit of silence. Yes, that's the way the game goes in the real world. Soon the brothers were already standing near a tall building. It was the Castle of Horrors, as in that very game. Now you need to capture it in real life. Looking at the castle, Monarch did not cease to admire what a cool thing the panorama there probably opens magnificent. In response to Min's concern about their past home, the boy assured that he would not sell it, because it was a gift from his mother. Still, it's hard to predict what will happen to that house if there is a monarch. There could be monsters or greedy players attacking them. After waiting for his brother's agreement, the monarch moved forward, and it was time to make history. It seems they were overflowing with enthusiasm. The monarch had already opened his inventory when his younger brother asked about the guards, but there must be a lot of them. With a slight chuckle, Hyuk asked, did his brother really think they would just break in here directly? The player took out a cloak of invisibility that immediately hid his body. This thing should help to pass unnoticed around the guards. This incredible sight shocked the boy. His brother even has such a thing. Hyuk grinned. He is the monarch in disguise. Soon, the guys were already dressed in an invisible robe. With this thing, they would easily get past the guards. After a few minutes, two invisible silhouettes swept past the soldiers, talking amongst themselves. Min seemed to be really happy. He was participating in such an adventure for the first time in his life, and he seemed to be having a lot of fun. The younger brother was delighted. He even asked the monarch to lend him this robe. Hyuk asked, he wouldn't do anything stupid, would he? The Castle of Terror towered on the great rock. Seemingly climbing up, there was something I was still tasked with, but they were already halfway there. The brothers walked down the street and discussed. It seems from the outside that this place has not yet been attacked by players. After the return will be weak. With a sinking heart, the younger brother said that in this castle, there would be succubi and incubi. The problem is that they attack consciousness. With irritation in his voice, the monarch asked if they didn't have talented mages. Why haven't they created an amulet against mental influence yet? Of course, in their world, mages were plentiful, but with the current advancement of technology, these things were so far out of reach. The monarch pondered. To create such things, one needs stones and other such components. Min suddenly informed that, fortunately, there was a way out of this situation. Hyuk looked at him with a surprised look. Fortunately, in the center of London, there is a mountain in which the mine with mana stones is found, so there should be no problems. When the brothers came a little closer, they noticed that the walls of the castle were too high for them to climb. Hyuk opened the inventory and started rummaging through it, while his brother still looked at him in surprise and couldn't believe his eyes. After a few seconds, Min had to cover himself with his hands to avoid being blinded by the bright light coming from Hyuk. Soon, his brother reincarnated into a monarch in his full form, now wearing armor that gleamed in the light of the moon. The hero then approached his brother from the back and took him by the shoulders, ordering him not to be afraid, but the younger still trembled. Soon the boy felt them rise up, his eyes widened, and a scream of fear escaped from his mouth, something he had not expected. It was too soon to be surprised. Soon, they landed on the right surface. Min was still trembling with fear and surprise. Now they were standing in front of the building itself. The high walls of the castle stretching high into the sky, and there were windows burning everywhere. The guys didn't notice how someone was already following them from one of the windows in the castle. A stranger was laughing at the newcomers. The boys moved forward along the neat path, straight to the entrance of the castle, and the atmosphere was relatively quiet, not a soul in sight. Junior kept marveling at how well-maintained the garden here was in a place like this. It seemed odd, to say the least. The monarch tapped his knuckles loudly on the door and waited for an answer, but he didn't want to destroy everything, because this would be his new home. Soon, the doors creaked open, revealing the darkness of the castle, where it was eerie and they didn't want to go in. Still, there was no other choice, and the two brothers went inside. Min was still trembling with fear. Inside was richly decorated with large columns, long corridors made apparently of marble. Min smelled even better than in the garden, as if they were in some kind of paradise place. But that was a misleading impression. Moving forward, the monarch said that if the smell gets stronger, let him hold his breath. It's the pollen the demons release that puts him to sleep. Suddenly, Junior heard something, some muffled laughter, and immediately goosebumps ran down his back. There was definitely someone here. The boy smelled this pleasant odor that was getting stronger with every second. The boy didn't know what was happening to him. Luckily, the monarch arrived in time and slapped his younger brother on the back, knocking the smell out of him. Looking at the boy, Hyuk told him to keep his temper in check, to which the younger boy took offense, actually. It was painful. As Min walked through the castle, he noticed that it was strange that they were here, and the elder hurried to reassure him. Since the boy is so worried, let him wear this. And the monarch threw him some shiny thing that the boy immediately caught. It was a mental barrier ring that blocks the negative effects of magical beings. With this succubus thing, you don't have to be afraid of succubi at all. Min rejoiced, but something was happening behind his back. He literally felt in the back of his head that there was someone looking at him, and also a gentle female voice. The boy turned around and saw a dozen beautiful women with horns on their heads, and they were succubi who were already preparing to attack the victim. They approached the boy and began to pull their hands toward him. From such an abundance of attention, Min lost his head. One of the beautiful girls came close to him and whispered in his ear if he wanted to have fun with her. The girls clung to him and began to tempt him with renewed vigor. Min did not know what to do. He was completely disarmed, but he seemed to like it. His eyes slowly began to close. He felt a heaviness in his head and began to fall into a deep sleep. He was snapped out of this state by the voice of his older brother, who bellowed for them to get the hell out of here. The succubi twitched. The monarch's face was terrifying, his eyes burning with blue fire and a grimace of rage on his face as he prepared to destroy them all. The girls were horrified by such a sight. They did not expect someone so strong to be here. As the demonesses scattered to different corners, the monarch approached his brother and shouted in his ear for him to finally come to his senses. The unfortunate boy fell to the ground. He had just regained consciousness and did not understand what was going on. His older brother just sighed heavily. Now having to listen to his older brother's lecture was just an inferior succubus. Min lowered his head and looked down guiltily. He looked back cautiously at the youngest's feet, but it was scary and dangerous. Hayuk turned to him and told him not to worry, everything would be fine, just let him stop fooling around. Climbing the stairs, the younger brother wondered at the monarch. It was the succubi right. Turning to his brother, Hyuk asked him what was so eager to see them naked. The boy immediately blushed. Everyone sees these demons in their own way. It all depends on their personal preferences. These creatures are capable of adjusting to thoughts. Soon, they entered a long corridor on either side of which stood armor as a backdrop. There was a very strange and oppressive atmosphere here. The air was viscous and comfortable. The monarch looked around the room and whistled. Well, isn't this nice? A smile appeared on his face. They aren't even going to be caught off guard. Hyuk was even a little disappointed. He was expecting something more, at least some kind of battle. Soon, he stopped in front of one of the armors and asked what he was doing there. The guy was looking right at the helmet. With his vision, he could already see perfectly well that there was someone hiding in the armor. It was probably the mistress. Somewhere deep within the helmet armor, two red lights lit up and began to stare at the intruder with hatred. Suddenly, the rest of the night scattered in different directions, and something spurted out of it with great speed, disappearing into the depths. The monarch immediately rushed after him, and this time this girl would not escape them. The guy was moving incredibly fast. He braked right in front of the mistress of the castle, blocking her path. The girl stopped for a second and looked at her opponent. But from what Hayuk saw there, he was stunned. In front of him stood a small demoness, but in no way resembling the ruler of Lilith. Memories immediately came to mind of how he had fought her in one of his walkthroughs. Back then, she was very different. The masked monarch then put on a full display, really quite different from the rest of the succubi. In front of him stood a girl with a charming appearance that could defeat anyone, and looked at her opponent. Then the girl laughed and rushed straight at her opponent, turning into a blob of energy. The guy had already prepared a sword. Even his powerful blade could not withstand such an onslaught, and broke. The monarch only watched in horror as he lost his only weapon. Lilith stood on one of the ruined buildings and laughed, but didn't this man incredible block such a blow? However, he wouldn't be able to dodge her attack, but the girl didn't have time to speak and stammered half a word. To her horror, she noticed one of her horns just fell off and fell to the ground, shocking the girl. Standing on the ground, the monarch snorted that he didn't have time and let him attack as soon as possible. After all, besides this girl, the place was already full of worries. There was obvious irritation on the guy's face, and he didn't plan to linger here. Lilith naturally could not bear such insolence, and rushed at her opponent with a fierce scream, her face contorted with a grimace. But now before the monarch stood a little girl not at all like the formidable ruler he had seen before. Hayuk looked at her with surprise, and really Lilith, the demon lord, only silently looked at him with hatred. Then the girl pushed the monarch aside like a harmful teenager and tried to hide in the depths of the castle. But before she could take a couple of steps, the man grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and lifted her up like a naughty kitten. The demoness was furious that he was even doing. However, the monarch wanted to know who she really was. Hayuk shouted at her to finally stop being stubborn. The demoness even got a little scared and stopped acting like a capricious child. His expression changed so much that even the demon queen couldn't hold back a shudder. Hyuk said that he would not ask a second time. Leaning over to the demoness, he couldn't believe it was really Lilith, the nightmare lord. And now, she looked like hell. He looked at the girl again in surprise and asked why she had turned into such a brat. Lilith only looked at him resentfully. Suddenly, Hyuk felt someone approaching him from behind and turned his head toward Lilith, who also froze. There was a loud rumble, but the monarch stood on his feet and was now furious at what kind of tricks this was. A hole appeared in the wall, and there were several dozen other demons. Among them were both ordinary succubi and some other much stronger ones. Behind his back, the guy heard someone's rough female voice, telling him not to make trouble and to get out of here. Marianne, the top-level succubus, stood beside his little brother, putting a hand on his shoulder and smiled. Min was horrified. With a maximally friendly smile, Hayuk said that there seemed to be a small misunderstanding that needed to be sorted out. He put on his mask, and a terrible energy began to emanate from his body. They should be begging him for mercy, not threatening him here. As soon as the demons saw this, they immediately rushed to the defense of their queen with the whole crowd. They wanted to destroy this man. They attacked all at once, but the monarch easily dodged their attacks by simply jumping up. In a second, the player was already behind Marianne's back. The girl did not expect anything like that and simply could not even react. Hyuk grabbed his very frightened brother and carried him away from these demons. Min continued to scream in fear and surprise. Taking him to the safe place, Hyuk asked if Min would be able to escape on his own, and Junior nodded his head affirmatively. At this time, several demons had already started to create fireball spells to burn the uninvited guests to the ground. Shots began to rattle everywhere, but the monarch dodged them with ease with his unprecedented speed. Hyuk was already beside them, and with a menacing voice he shouted, "Let them try to do that again and they'll be fingerless." Marianne had already prepared her spell to destroy the man. Once and for all that was left was to shoot. A tremendous explosion sounded, and the lightning along with it hit the castle spire directly, energizing it. Everywhere there was a smell of smoke. Demons could see what happened, and on their faces appeared terror. They did not expect to face such a strong opponent. In front of them stood the monarch, right next to their lord Lilith, and held a raised sword. Apparently, he was the one who attracted the lightning. Smiling, the boy asked. Now she was ready to talk, or not, after all. The demoness looked at him with a pitiful look, and realized that she had little choice. After all, this stranger had won. Soon, the demoness was already sitting on her bed and glaring fiercely at the uninvited guests. She was very annoyed. The monarch, along with his brother, stood right in front of her with his arms crossed over his chest. Finally, they would be able to have a proper conversation. Looking around the room with an incredulous look, Hyuk marveled it was indeed a castle of horrors, more like a teenager's bedroom. Shouting indignantly, Lilith confirmed. And where he thought they were now, indeed, this is her castle. With a laughing voice, the boy remarked that this was more a castle of enchantment than a castle of horrors, and that everything was too beautiful here. The demoness looked at him in surprise, not understanding what the guy means. What is he even talking about? But really, it was the nest of Lilith, Lord of Nightmares, though now it's more like some kind of carnival. Marianne decided to be the first to speak up. She said that Lilith was not yet aware of all the events. The monarch looked at her over his shoulder with a surprised look. The succubus said it's only been 100 days since the demon lord appeared, so she hasn't had time to get up to speed. She's just a kid. Here, even the two brothers were surprised. Is it really so little? It's kind of strange and suspicious. Then the monarch looked back at the demoness, who had been sitting silently watching the uninvited guests all this time. Well, that explains everything now. That's why Lilith was looking at them like that now. The demoness looked at them with an uncomprehending stare. Looking at Marianne, the monarch asked she that the only succubus supreme here in his eyes read distrust. The succubus replied that she herself did not know that only humans divided them into ranks. They had no such hierarchy. Hyuk spread his arms. Okay, so they are the strongest here now, the girl confirmed. So, he looked at the three demonesses and said in surprise that in the game, they were much more than that. Something a little small for the nest of the most powerful demoness. In an aggrieved voice, Marianne said that the details were unknown to them. They just opened their eyes at one point and realized they were here. A smile appeared on the monarch's face. Okay, now he understood what was going on. It was time to get down to business, if that was the case. He opened his ghost inventory and stuck his arm up to his elbow in there. Lilith continued to watch in surprise. After a second, the player took out a pentagram sheet from there and offered the demoness a contract. He said it without any hesitation. The demoness looked at the piece of paper with interest. She had seen something like this for the first time. It was a soul subjugation contract. The girl said with interest that she had never heard of such a thing. Only Marianne realized what was the matter, then immediately shouted for the sovereign to do nothing. If she did, she would be a servant forever. Hyuk was boiling with rage. He didn't like it when someone interfered with his conversation, especially a demon. Suddenly, an aura formed near him that made even the powerful demoness shiver in fear. Looking at her with a fierce look, the guy said she shouldn't interfere if her own life was dear. The succubi looked in horror at the intruder, who was so strong that he was terrifying to look at. The player approached Lilith and put his hand on her head and told her not to listen to these monsters, because only he speaks the truth here. Hyuk looked at her good-naturedly and said in a sweet voice that he would protect her at all costs, so there was nothing to fear. The girl, who had not expected anything like this, blushed with embarrassment and looked at the player with big eyes to see what he even meant. The player then turned to the demonesses and asked if they were really sure they could protect their lordess if someone like him came here. Not getting an answer, he said he now had the details of the contract. Lilith was still looking at him with big eyes, full of disbelief. This contract will remain in effect until Lilith awakens and can become the full ruler of this castle. If she decided not to renew the contract after her awakening, it would immediately be broken. The girl continued to stare silently at the stranger. But she would have to learn to behave more appropriately. The girl jumped up from her seat and shouted. Seeing the disbelief on his face, he assured me that they would include a break clause in the contract. So no need to worry, let him sign. And if she violates the terms, then her soul will be destroyed. The girl, still continuing to look at the stranger, agreed to let it be. Standing nearby, Marianne couldn't do anything. She just reached out to her lordess, but it was too late. With one deft movement of her fingernail island, Lilith made a small hole in her finger, and blood spurted out of it. She put her finger to the contract and signed her signature, indicating that they had made their contract. Now their bodies began to be enveloped by a strange energy. Their souls became bound by a contract until the girl finally awakened. Now the contract was done, but Lilith still looked distrustful. She was a little scared, but it couldn't be helped. Then the guy turned to Marianne. The girl looked at him with wonder and caution. What else he needed from her? He was their lord now, and the succubi knelt before him. They had no other choice but to be servants. The monarch looked at them with a satisfied smile. Finally, the first step was taken. His plan slowly began to materialize. In the United States of America, there was a fight going on in Monument Valley. There were many monsters, and the local defense forces were trying to protect the citizens. The monsters were many, and they were hitting harder and harder, and people were trying to hold them back. But with each passing second, it was getting worse. The soldier felt an incredible pressure. Even his strong armor was unable to fully protect him from the attack. Turning back, he saw his comrade fighting alone against several dozen such monsters. Richard Paulson, the squad leader, fought with such fury that alone he was able to deal with several monsters at the same time. He swung his weapon and destroyed the monsters one by one. This was an incredibly skilled warrior. Richard was a Sun Knight of the Absolute Guild, one of the most powerful guilds in the world. A subordinate came up to him and turned to his master. The man seemed to be concerned about something. His name was Harry, nicknamed Scythe of Conviction, and he held out the phone and said it seemed like the commander should take a look at this. Richard picked up the phone and looked at the screen with surprise, a smile on his face, as everything finally happened. The newsfeed said that the masked monarch had finally returned. Although his identity was not revealed, it was known that he had taken over the castle. The action moved to Russia. There were members of the resistance there too. People were surprised to read news reports about the appearance of the masked monarch, for how long they hadn't heard from him, and now. The news spread incredibly fast. Even in distant London, everyone had already heard that the masked monarch had returned. Every newspaper headline said just that the suddenly returned hero had already managed to capture the castle. In Hong Kong on the big screen, the presenters told about the return of the mysterious hero who possessed incredible power. It caused a sensation. All over the world, people were surprised to read the news that the monarch had finally returned and had already conquered the castle. Meanwhile, the hero stood in his hometown of Seoul and observed the peaceful life in the city. Suddenly, several people dressed in expensive suits approached him from behind. The player turned around and looked at them over his shoulder. It was Choi Seok Guild Master Bal Hai. He had a 102nd level and a very unpleasant expression on his face. It was obvious that the monarch was not very happy to see an old acquaintance, so they greeted each other. Between them, gradually built up tension. Hyuk said that he never realized these people that waited for him. Choi thought about choosing words. After thinking for a few minutes, the man said that they had done a lot of stupid things in the game, and now they were a little ashamed of their actions. The guild leader assured him that it would never happen again, and asked for his forgiveness. There seemed to be no sincerity in those words. The monarch laughed, something he had not expected from his worst enemy, who was making hell in the game. All the same, in an interesting world they live, asking forgiveness from the man who recently took their lives from the face did not leave the smile. But there was one condition. Tomorrow they'll give an interview to the world apologizing for what they've done. The guild leader's eyes widened as he didn't expect to be asked to do something like this, although he didn't think it would be that easy. In the end, he had no choice but to agree, which he did, and they eventually went their separate ways. The next day, nothing seemed to have changed. People went about their business and performed their ordinary duties. However, every newspaper clipping had one news item on it. Balhae Guild was apologizing to all of Korea, and its leader was in the picture. In the next few hours, many people gathered near the castle, as well as journalists and film crews. People shouted that they knew the monarch was inside. Just let him come out and answer a few questions they really wanted to see with their own eyes. The director of the association, Oh Myung, a fat man with a sly expression on his face, was watching all of this. Suddenly, an aide came up to him and suggested that maybe they should just leave since the monarch wasn't showing. It was the 12th year player Park Soo-shing in the game with this fellow monarch. Very bad jokes. If they bother him, it will be bad. However, the principal didn't let him finish and shouted at his assistant. The man was furious at such insolence. This masked clown hadn't even gone out to the people yet, and they want to just walk away. Myung doesn't know what this man is talking about, but he's still the leader of the All Korea Players Association and can't let anyone humiliate him. In the end, Fatty couldn't stand it and started pounding on the door with his fist, demanding that the monarch come out to him, because after all, he is the director. What does he allow himself? Suddenly the doors opened. They were unlocked, and the man was even a little stunned by the surprise. A smile appeared on the fat man's face. Finally, he will see this clown in a mask. No one dares to disregard the attention of the principal. It was necessary to do it at once. The man laughed, and all the others just looked at him with surprise, not expecting such impudence. The aide Standing in the crowd and adjusting his glasses, he didn't expect the principal to be so persistent. But then something unexpected happened. Behind the fat man was a cloud of intoxicating pollen that began to act instantly. The aide shouted for everyone to immediately cover their noses and hold their breath as quickly as possible. People began to look around fearfully. They need to run away from the exit. The pollen began to spread, forming a huge cloud that began to engulf everything around them. People tried their best to hold their breath as much as possible, and the pollen became thicker and thicker and covered everything around them. When the smoke cleared, they saw an interesting picture of the director standing almost naked in his underwear and dancing under the influence of hypnosis. His face was completely insane, like some kind of lunatic. The assistant yelled to immediately protect the principal. He was hallucinating. Journalists immediately began to record the sensational material. Director runs naked through the people. Flew a wave of laughter. Somewhere, there stood Monarch. Hyuk. Together with his brother, just stood back and watched. Min said that it seemed to be some big shot. Suddenly, there was a call on the phone to the Monarch from an unknown number. The guy pulled out his phone and looked at the screen. Then he waved to his brother and asked if he minded Hyuk stepping aside and talking. The younger man nodded his head. As the Monarch spoke on the phone, his expression changed, and his eyes began to round. It was Roselio. The guy immediately became serious about how she got the number, and the girl laughed. It was Jane, the leader of the Dark Chamber of the Eternal World. The guy was walking down the street and tried to behave casually, what she even needed. The girl asked if there was anything for her, because soon there would be an auction under the Dark Chamber, but there was nothing to please the participants. The Monarch apologized and said that he had a lot of things to do, so no. But Jane was not going to give up in this world. Everything is different after all. He needs money. After a bit of silence, Hyuk said he would give her a ring. Jane was interested, and what kind of ring it was. Hearing what the ring was, and who it belonged to before, the girl smiled, and it became more and more interesting. As for the exchange, they use the exchange store on Soul Street. She will send him all the details in a message. The girl hung up, leaving her acquaintance in complete bewilderment. The guy didn't even notice how he was just standing on the street. As soon as possible, he reached the station and was already rummaging around in the designated place. There was indeed a sack bag tightly closed. As soon as the Monarch brought home the suitcase, that the younger Even's eyes went wide at what he saw. The whole suitcase was full of money from top to bottom. It was unclear how many millions or even billions there were. Seeing a small envelope at the top of the Monarch's desk, he opened it immediately and guessed who the letter was from. The guy immediately started reading it, and it was 9 billion. The truck was speeding down the highway, ignoring all obstacles, driven by a full-bodied man. There was a lot of photographers and street gawkers who were interested to see what was going on here. A large convoy of cars moved straight towards the castle. Passing through the gates, there were also many people crowded here. Chul got out of his luxurious Bentley and looked around. Although he was dressed in a suit, he had a blacksmith's hat on his head. In honor of such a celebration, Monarch decided to dress up the succubi as idols to entice the audience not to say they were very fond of it. The blacksmith looked at the girls with a disgruntled look. It seems he didn't really like that prospect. What a circus this was in the first place. As he entered the main hall, he saw the Monarch, who stood and seemed to be waiting for an old acquaintance. Bowing his head, Hyuk smiled and said that Chul was late. But even so, the guy seemed to be in high spirits. Without waiting for any more words, the blacksmith grabbed him by the neck and began to choke him. The boy tried to excuse himself and get away from the blacksmith's tight embrace, but it was all in vain. He begged him to let go. After all, the master took pity and released the unfortunate Monarch. That's how strong the power is. Hyuk tried to catch his breath. Looking at Chul, the Monarch asked him what he had decided to change his mind, and the man hesitated, gathering his thoughts. Still rubbing his bruised neck, the Monarch asked, so whether to move his workshop here or not. Flopping down in his chair, the old blacksmith started grumbling again. Just don't let the guy think he's doing it because he likes it. Suddenly, the man became saddened. Here can find the necessary ingredients so he can't refuse such an offer. In addition, all this will take quite a long time, is the real world, so to achieve the same results. As in the game, you need to try hard. As soon as Monarch said he wanted to do it in 1 month, Chul almost swallowed his tongue. It was unthinkable. Even he wouldn't be able to handle such a thing. However, Hyuk said that he wanted to put the dusky blacksmiths first in line to use resources and monsters. Is he still in doubt? Unable to cope with his anger, the blacksmith shouted that in that case, they needed a mana generator. Hyuk was already picking through his inventory. Soon, he pulled out 3 hearts, warm and seemingly still alive, and a smile appeared on his face again, which should be enough. Following that, he threw this gift to the blacksmith. Chul said it was more than enough, and tried to hold the outlandish object in his hands. But he had something else. Chul was already wary of the premonition that this was going to be some kind of adventure again. Stretching into a smile, the Monarch said he needed the blacksmith to do him another favor. What the man heard made the hairs on his head stand on end. The Monarch was still the same after all. His ideas were still just as crazy. The memory again recalled scraps of when he was a Monarch in the game and was busy destroying monsters. The man nicknamed the Butcher shouted that they would handle this and let the Monarch go ahead and work on moving forward. They are, after all, a squad of masked men that he himself created, so let him not worry and leave these monsters to them. The girl waved her hand and said that they could easily handle them. These were just ordinary monsters. There was nothing to be afraid of. But he, as the main on the contrary, should save energy for the battle with the King of Demons, because there will be no jokes. Butcher barked for the monarch to finally stop wasting time here and go ahead. They can handle it here, so don't let him worry. Hyuk looked at his comrades with a look of utter gratitude. He hadn't expected them to be so selfless. Suddenly, the figure of the demon, the main monster of this world, appeared behind him, and his womb-like voice was heard. In just one blow, he was easily able to throw the hero far back. After all, their powers were incommensurate. The monarch was lying on the ground. He was badly injured, but still conscious. Steam was coming out of his mouth. The demon had shortened the distance in a second, and was already standing close to the boy, preparing to end this battle. Once and for all, his eyes were burning. A smile appeared on the monster's face, and in his nasty voice, he said that he was very disappointed. He had hoped there would be a good opponent. At the last second, the devil noticed that there were dozens of shards flying at him, ready to destroy him. It was one of the monarch's assistants who did it. But the demon put up his shield and blocked such a powerful attack without even moving. Next was another hero who struck from top to bottom, but the demon blocked that too with one hand as if playing with them. The girl flew from the other side, preparing her energy attack. Demon saw it all perfectly well, anticipating their movement, blocked and dodged. It was starting to annoy him. He'd kill these bugs first, then take the lead. The monarch lay in the distance, and in no way could help his friends. He was badly injured and could barely move. Butcher appeared out of nowhere and started asking if his commander was okay. He shouted that we should retreat and let the monarch go first, because it was too dangerous here and he had no strength. Then, he turned back to where another hero butcher was already standing, asking him to take care of this man and keep him alive at all costs. In front of him stood the master of the Dusky Blacksmiths, an incredibly strong hero capable of fighting monsters alone. The master leaned toward the monarch and wanted to help him stand up, but the hero pushed his hand away and answered rudely. He then turned to the butcher and ordered them to retreat again. They had too little strength to deal with this demon. But his comrade didn't listen to him. He said that the only one who can destroy this demon is only the monarch, and he needs to become stronger to win. This is, after all, the main goal of the masked soldiers. Butcher smiled, already anticipating the battle, so it was useless to stop him. The hero wanted to stop him, but immediately coughed up blood. The blacksmith was afraid, because the monarch was on the verge of life. In the end, all the soldiers were defeated. The girl was lying in a pool of her own blood and barely breathing. The monarch himself also suffered. His armor was almost completely destroyed. He stood in the middle of the ashes and could do nothing. All his comrades fell. The boy cried out in grief. He had lost everyone he knew, and now all alone he couldn't defeat the Demon King. He felt miserable. These memories took over Hyuk's head, and he didn't notice that he had been staring out the window for some time. Suddenly, he was distracted by a knock on the door, and a voice informing him that a visit had arrived. Ordering the guests in, the monarch approached them and saw familiar faces now in real life. In front of him stood his battle comrades Butcher and two others, a girl with a pink cloak and a guy in a gray mask. They stood opposite each other for some time, trying to realize that they were seeing old acquaintances. Captain Butcher smiled. He was incredibly happy to see the old commander after all this time. The second soldier, nicknamed Guillotine, was also smiling. He looked through his shiny glasses. It was obvious that he was happy to see them. The girl, nicknamed Ice Flower, looked around at her friends. She could finally see them after such a long separation and painful parting. The monarch looked at his friends and wondered if they were doing well. After all, they hadn't seen each other for so long. Almost unanimously, they replied that everything was fine. Butcher hugged the others, and it was obvious that there was a very strong bond between them. With a white-hot smile on his face, Captain Butcher stated that they had been doing just fine all this time, so there was nothing to worry about. The monarch asked if they had contact with the rest of the Butcher, readily replied they had arrived here as soon as they heard about the commander's appearance. Continuing to smile, he said that everyone else had been preparing very hard for the arrival of their commander, so now everything was fine. Some even managed to move here with their families to see the monarch and show the rest of us. Lowering his eyes, Hyuk sadly concluded it must have been hard to have had to travel so far right here just to see him. Willingly, Iceflower said that they were all waiting for their commander's orders to follow him anywhere. At the same second, Monarch tossed the case to the Butcher. The man caught it at the last moment and looked surprised to see what it even was. There was as much as 3 billion. One man even whistled at such a sum. Why would such a generous amount? Smiling, the monarch replied, "Let them organize a headquarters for soldiers here. With this money, it should be more than enough." The rest of the group opened their mouths in surprise. They had not expected things to develop with such eagerness. But soon construction began here. A lot of heavy equipment and workers were brought here to set up the headquarters. The monarch, along with the blacksmith, stood on the balcony and watched the guy they handled faster than expected. Looking at his buddy, Charles smiled and replied, "Including the soldier, about 100 people are working on this project, and the work will go fast. Plus, the forge will be ready soon, and then they'll get really fired up and things will move even faster." In a satisfied voice, the monarch asked if he too would need to prepare the blacksmith, wondered what this was about. A smile formed on the boy's face, so predatory that the blacksmith's goosebumps ran, of course, towards taking over the world. Looking at his comrade with a surprised look, Chill couldn't even say anything, so it was so shocking. Somewhere in sunny Italy, a bloody witch sat drinking a cup of hot coffee and looking through her dark glasses. The man sitting next to her was clearly unhappy about something and turned away from her in the other direction. The girl asked him if he would just walk away. Without answering a word, the man stood up, which threw the blood witch into a great surprise. He didn't seem to be in the mood for dialogue. 12 o'clock. He was as always nauseatingly punctual. The man looked silently through his dark glasses. So, what would the subject be? The witch looked at her interlocutor with an expectant gaze. The man held out to her a small red box, similar to the one used for wedding rings. As soon as the box was opened, a bright light fell on the woman's face. She even opened her mouth in surprise and seemed to be satisfied. And really, inside the box was a ring, but not a wedding ring, but with a big gemstone inside, and very beautiful. The man continued to stare at her, ignoring all of Jane's questions about the red-masked monarch. He only said the price was 200 billion. Hearing this amount of money, the Blood Witch was even a little stunned. She didn't expect it to be so expensive, but still, there was no choice. Without further ado, she called the right number and ordered the required amount to be transferred to the same account. The man checked the phone, everything matched. The purchase was made, and the case was closed. He silently got up and, hiding the phone, headed towards the exit of the room. The Blood Witch continued to sit in her seat. Lastly, he said over his shoulder that this item they had indeed received from the masked monarch. The Blood Witch was at a loss for words. In the Korean city of Kwando, there was chaos everywhere as explosions were heard and buildings collapsed as if a huge battle had begun. People ran in panic to any safe place with their eyes wide open in terror. They screamed. The crowd of people were chased by monsters. They stretched their horrible hands towards them in an attempt to catch the hapless victims. The army tried to prevent, but it was too late. Monarch, along with his team, sat in the headquarters of the battle in Echo Canyon, and the game was known as the Undead Paradise. What's happening now will turn the city into a wasteland. So if there's overflow, we need to start evacuating. They say there's already a lot of casualties. Now, this is the main concern of the government. The masked monarch was thoughtful. The situation was critical. After a short deliberation, the guy said that it was this city that would be the target of their first raid. Everyone was surprised, although it was obvious. Folding his hands in front of him, the monarch smiled and said that their team was dealing with places that ordinary people were afraid to even look at. Soldiers smiled. Finally, after a long time, they were expected a real battle. How much they missed. Therefore, the feeling. The monarch put his hand forward and proudly said that the whole world would henceforth learn anew about the existence of masked soldiers. In a monotone voice, a reporter was broadcasting live directly from the palace's opening ceremony. There were photographers everywhere say the masked monarch has set his subordinates a serious task, saying they are going to clear Echo Canyon. The ceremony started any minute now. The first to come out was Captain Butcher, and he led an army of masked soldiers, all of whom started taking pictures. Soon the heroes found themselves in the armory where they had to choose everything they needed. The monarch said that if there were any questions, let them certainly ask. From now on, they will have a lot of work to do. Let them think it's a down payment. You don't have to deny yourself anything to choose the best. But now, at the opening ceremony, Butcher was very sad for some reason, as if thinking about something that had been bothering him for a long time. But he quickly pulled himself together and, pointing to the bus, said they were now headed for Echo Canyon and ordered them to take their seats. The reporter went on to comment on any event. Now masked soldiers are heading to the scene on the buses. Sitting on the couch, Monarch along with Lilith watched the report without much interest. The girl continued to munch on her ice cream. Eventually, the guy got tired of it and yelled for the demoness to finally stop eating ice cream. She's always eating. Lilith didn't even think to listen to him. It was too delicious, and there was nothing the girl could do about it. The monarch had to put up with it. Okay, let her throw the ice cream. They have to go. The girl almost choked. They're going out again. Smiling, Hayuk looked at her and said there were more important things to do than just sit on the couch and eat ice cream. He needs to pick up something. The demoness looked at him with interest. Apparently, the commander is up to something again. There were several armed soldiers on duty near the entrance to the building, blocking the way in. One of them was holding a cell phone that was broadcasting live from the scene as the masked soldiers headed into the canyon. Suddenly, a strange sound like footsteps came to the ears of one of the soldiers, and the man immediately raised the bolt and prepared himself. A pink cloud of some strange smoke formed in front of him, and the man didn't even have time to think of anything, but just watched. As soon as the pink smoke hit the nose of one of the soldiers, he immediately began to lose consciousness, and soon his mind left him. The two soldiers were disarmed instantly. They fell to the ground and fell into a deep, lethargic sleep could safely pass. In front of them stood the monarch, along with the demoness. The girl wondered, did they pass out so quickly? Some of them are weak. Still, Lilith's childlike nature prevailed, and she immediately started touching the soldiers. The monarch was angry they didn't have time for child's play. They had to go. Soon, they descended into the basement and were already walking down the long corridor ahead. Turning her head in different directions, Lilith marveled at the amount of mana that was present in this place here. It was too much. The girl asked why they came to this place in the first place. What they needed here, it's a protected area. It was an underground cemetery where priests went to worship the gods, and paladins went when they lost their lives. Though it was supposed to be a sacred place, it had changed a lot because of the leader of the demon army. Interfering with the priests during worship is like denying the authority of God. Lilith and Monarch walked down a long corridor that didn't want to end. Suddenly, from behind, Lilith was attacked by a huge skeleton with burning eyes dressed in armor and already reaching for her with his bony hands. Lilith reacted instantly, and with one powerful blow, turned the monster into a pile of bones. Though she was small, she had plenty of strength. It was not so simple monster under the influence of magical power, and again attacked the girl. Lilith, from surprise, cried out and fell back. Thank God Hayuk, and with a single blow of his fist, threw the monster far back, turning it into dust. A crackle of bones was heard. It seems the demon lord personally ordered the takeover of this place. This was less and less to the monarch's liking. The local tainted bishop has become a level 200 undead. He is basically one of the strongest bosses. Fighting him is a challenge. But the monarch didn't come here for him. A long corridor flanked by creepy skeletal statues spread out before his eyes. Hyuk moved forward, ordering Lilith to stand there. The girl did not understand and asked why she had to wait. The guy moved forward, but the demoness all began to tremble with fear here. Creepy somehow. Strange that the demon lord is afraid of such a place. In front of them were massive doors flanked by guards. They were statues, of course, but they could come alive at any moment. As the monarch moved forward with a firm gait, he saw before him a sword that had been thrust into some kind of altar and was emanating a bright light. It was the mightiest blade of the eternal world-respect Dragon Lord Admarian's incredibly powerful weapon. Without much effort pulling out the weapon, Hayuk looked at it. The sword glistened with overflowing mana energy. At one glance, it was clear it was a great piece. But as soon as the guy pulled the sword out of its place, who heard behind him the crackle of bones coming back, he saw an army of skeletons approaching him. The pontiff was in charge of all this, of course, holding his rod. The monster looked creepy. The monarch felt as if he was back in the game again, so why not remember the old days? The suit instantly appeared on his body. But something was wrong. Suddenly the monsters disappeared, the skeletons parted, and a strange, dark silhouette appeared in the distance. Who is this monarch? Opened his eyes in surprise. He thought he was going to fight the Skeleton King. But in front of him stood someone completely different. A man dressed in a cloak, and on his face, instead of a mask, was a skull. The skeletons immediately rushed at him. The unknown bounced aside with a deft move, leaving the line of attack. Suddenly, a magical pentagram-shaped drawing appeared under the destroyed skeleton. The sorcerer began to summon the undead. Strange words in an unknown language sounded in the air, and the bones began to rise by themselves, forming something completely different. The necromancer stood in the middle of the skeleton army and called out to his servants to battle. The skeletons froze and dared not move from their position. Before my eyes appeared a strange creature, created from the bones of skeletons. It was a dog with burning eyes and a creepy face. Necromancer commanded it. The monarch looked with surprise at this monster. For the first time in his life, he had seen something like this. It was a hellhound that immediately rushed straight at him. The monster cracked its bones and destroyed the skeletons one by one. This hound was much stronger than ordinary skeletons. But it only took one blow for the pontiff to destroy this hellhound, leaving behind nothing but a pile of bones. His formidable silhouette loomed somewhere in the distance. The necromancer trembled slightly, in fear. He had not expected to face such a strong opponent. The monster opened its wide mouth, and a bright beam of violet energy emerged from it, its eyes burning with rage. One more second, and something terrible would happen. There was an explosion, but the necromancer luckily managed to block it. Although it cost him a lot of effort, the man was barely able to stay on his feet. The huge skeleton was already flying towards him, wanting to deliver the final blow and finally finish off its victim. But the necromancer managed to dodge. Behind the huge skeleton, there were already several hellhound skeleton dogs standing behind it. They were rolling their vile mouths and preparing to attack. After a wave from their master, the dogs rushed into battle directly at the giant skeleton, their eyes burning with rage, and crackling could be heard everywhere. The pontiff swung his rod, and in one blow struck several dozen hellspawn at once. He dealt with them as if they were toys. Following that, he launched several explosive balls directly at the necromancer who stood in the distance and was unsuspecting. After the explosion, the skeleton looked towards the enemy with a burning eye to see if he had survived. The smell of scorched earth was everywhere. Everyone was alive. The monarch arrived in time and protected the strange necromancer with his shield spell. The necromancer was shocked at what this man was doing here. He didn't ask for help. The monarch replied that this man's character hadn't changed at all. Swinging his sword, he launched a powerful wave of energy directly at the giant skeleton monster before it could react, and stood still. A second later, there was an explosion. After such a thing, no one could. Stay alive monarch just stood there and watched the result of his actions. The sorcerer simply watched the player's actions and couldn't believe his eyes that someone so powerful had come to his aid. Turning to the stranger, the monarch said that they hadn't seen each other since the 400th Hope Squad, right? This necromancer's name was Yang Su Cheng. He stood there not realizing who this even was and how he knew his name. It took him a second to realize who was in front of him, and he immediately asked if the monarch was going to the canyon. He asked, "What about the necromancer? It's just a bunch of undead. Is he so crazy that he came here for this?" The necromancer laughed. He's been crazy for a long time. Since they met then, the monarch has one crazy proposal for him. Ian looked at him with surprised eyes. Without any hesitation, Hyuk said he wanted the necromancer to join the masked squad. Not expecting such a harsh sentence, Ian didn't know what to say. It was too fast. The smiling monarch said he would help him achieve what he wanted and surpass Ahmed Hassan. Squinting his eyes, the necromancer thought it was indeed a good suggestion, but it was too fast, and he thought there was a catch. Besides, the masked soldiers are already very strong, so why would they want someone like Ian, who's just a simple warlock, is pointless. Turning around with a smile on his face, the monarch said that this time they must catch him at all costs. His voice sounded resounding. They must catch the devil. Ian stood behind and did not know what to say. This sentence fell on him like a thunderbolt. Somewhere far away in the airport premises, there were many people, some going on their flights, and some returning to their home country. Jane was walking down the hallway and pulling behind her a large pink valise. With her belongings, the girl looked irresistible. Suddenly, her phone rang. She answered it immediately and heard a familiar voice in the receiver. The woman looked at people who were looking at posters of masked heroes and said she had just arrived in Korea. In the end, she said that she would sort it out herself, her voice sounding very unhappy, as if she had been stumped by something. Suddenly, the woman shifted her gaze sideways to one of the screens on which the news was broadcasting. There was the same monarch. She said she would meet him first and then deal with the rest, and hung up. Soon the girl came to the cafe. There were very few people there, only a lonely man sitting near the window with a cup of some drink. She immediately recognized Sung-min and called out to him. The boy turned a surprised look towards the woman. She came closer. The frightened kid said hello. In a trembling voice, the girl asked, "So the monarch didn't come?" In broken English, Min said he didn't know the language very well, so it would be difficult to dream here. Then the girl switched to the Roselian language that was used in the game, which made it much easier since Min was also a player. He was still nervous at the sight of this girl. Jane said it was nice to meet you. She introduced herself and said she was the leader of a black group, which put the kid in an even bigger stupor and scared him. Sitting down beside him, she immediately congratulated him on mopping up. The canyon echoed. Min thanked her still in the same shaky, scared voice. Jane then asked where Monarch Min was and said that he had a lot of things to do right now, so he had to leave. Taking a few sips from the mug, Jane smiled. Of course, he is a very busy man. Then we should get down to business. Taking a small briefcase from under the table, Min placed it on the table and slid it toward the girl. She carefully but quickly assessed the contents and seemed satisfied. Closing the suitcase, she said confidently that she would take care of it and not to worry about anything. Her voice was calm. The boy wanted to say something else about the monarch, but Jane reassured him it was only a matter of time before they got here. As Richard walked through the airport in Korea, he looked extremely wary, realizing that the press would not be spared. It happened like that, and all sorts of reporters immediately began to hover around him, asking about his purpose for coming to Korea. Michael Bjolin, a representative from the UK, was sitting in his comfortable car drinking champagne and enjoying the views of another country. Following this, a woman accompanied by 2 bodyguards appeared at the airport. People immediately began to pay attention to her. She was incredibly beautiful. This representative of China, Luo Soi, next to her constantly had 2 men of strong physique. Russian representative Yan Galayev was now in the center of Korea and ate the local cuisine, enjoying its divine taste. Japan's representative Hasegato Ryota was in a cafe thinking over a cup of coffee. Next was the man from Germany, Dragon Slayer Manuel Mateus, a bald man formidable in appearance wearing a cloak. Soon, he was standing near the castle of the mask and was amazed at its grandeur. He had never seen such a thing in person before, but only in a game. All the news was bursting with the announcement that the representatives of the most prominent guilds had arrived in Korea for a general convention. Richard walked surrounded by photographers. People were interested in what important business had gathered the most famous players in their country. To everyone's surprise, came the news that all the representatives gathered near the Castle of the Mask, there, by the way, already crowded a lot of people. And inside, representatives of different countries were already sitting at a luxurious table and talking among themselves while eating delicious food. Luo sat beside Richard, who was frowning as usual, and kept looking in his direction with a very interesting look. The blacksmith and the butcher stood on the balcony and watched. Chol couldn't believe that he was seeing all these people in one place again. But a smile was shining on the blacksmith's face after all. The monarch has a talent for creating such problems, and it's completely serious. Anyway, he's on fire as always, so let him do it this time. Michael finally got sick of it all and pounded his fist on the table and shouted how much longer they would have to wait for this monarch. Seeing all this, Richard said that Michael was impatient as always, at which the man took great offense to the fact that no one dares to show him such insolence. The Chinese woman said with a heavy sigh that the monarch didn't seem to have changed a bit either. Everything is late as usual. Smiling, she added that this man still thought they were all worthless, so there was nothing to be surprised about. When Michael heard this statement, he was very surprised. I mean, worthless. He thought he was one of the main players. The woman turned to him and clarified, because they were constantly used as expendable material during the game. Pouring a drink from the decanter, Zhengalayev said optimistically that he thought they had helped him get to the final quest after all. Or does she mean that this man could have gotten there without their help? A snide smile appeared on the man's face. But then the Chinese woman could not stand it and shouted after finishing the quest. The monarch, after all, received the entire reward. This is completely unfair. Richard frowned, suggesting that everyone speak frankly, since everything was clear without any unnecessary words. It's not about winning glory, it's about the reward for completing the quest. Luo looked at him with a surprised look and gritted her teeth. Isn't that why they're all here to see what the reward for the last quest was? That's why they came here from their own countries. A smile appeared on Michael's face, and he said that one thing was clear. The monarch had brought all the items from the game. Let's just look at the equipment of the masked soldiers. It was obviously not made in their world, wasn't it? Galev could not agree more. He too looked at the soldiers. Everything was exactly as Michael said. Something was definitely wrong. Suddenly, the monarch's voice rang out, and everyone else fell silent, turning around to look at Luo, who was still in the same position. The doors opened, and there appeared the monarch with the rest of the masked warrior members. Such a good day should be enjoyed. With a smile on his face, Hyuk asked if they could have imagined that everyone would gather together again at once like that. Michael, who didn't share such enthusiasm, just grinned at him, but it was some kind of bad joke. Gritting his teeth, the Briton said that they had not come here to discuss the old days. They were here for some business. So let Monarch answer why he brought them here. I think Michael was pretty pissed off. Still with the same smile on his face, Hyuk asked him, why does he ask about it? Does it matter now? Let him have fun. But seeing the mood of the guests, he decided to get straight to the point, and with the same smile on his face, he waved his hand. As soon as Richard saw the monarch's hand disappear into thin air, he was surprised, but he could not believe it. Ryota's face rounded up in surprise. This was an interdimensional vault, but how did it get here? Could it really have been brought to this world? But questions were superfluous here. The monarch jerkily took out a large axe from the vault, and that was the answer to all questions. All the guild members present held their breath for the first time in their lives. They had seen something like this and couldn't believe their eyes. Gritting his teeth, Michael hissed, where the monarch even got such things from how he managed to do it. Without the slightest hesitation, Hyuk held out the hammer forward. It once belonged to Mike, didn't it? Now it's here. Unable to endure such abuse any longer, the Briton rushed straight to the monarch with the aim of taking the youth away from him. However, the hero put his hand out in front and said that he didn't call everyone here to tease, so let him calm down and sit back down. From now on, the arms auction begins, said the monarch, and showed everyone young. Now everyone will have a chance to get their weapons back. Everyone caught their breath for a second and froze in their poses, unable to believe what they had just heard. Michael was the first to come to his senses and shouted that this was nonsense, that it was his hammer and that it was his by right. With a laughing voice, Monarch asked, why would this hammer be in his possession from such insolence? Michael almost swallowed his tongue how to understand it at all. Everything he brought from the game was unintentional. There were no owners. It was just lying on the ground, so Monarch picked it up. Michael could not accept such insolence and just gritted his teeth. He realized that the monarch was right. Suddenly, for everyone, Richard said that this hammer is him. Michael looked at him with a surprised and angry look. The Briton let out a scream. He couldn't let his favorite weapon go to anyone else but himself. He shouted for him to shut up. But Richard smiled conscientiously and said, there's an auction here, so what's the problem if Richard participates? Michael, who wouldn't give up, said that if he did, he would just destroy it, and that would be the end of it. Suddenly a voice called out, asking them to be quiet because the auction was about to begin. The minimum bid is the starting bid is 10 million. Minimum bid is $500,000. A smiling man happily announced the opening of the auction. The bidding had begun. When Jane entered the monarch's office, the first thing she asked him was if he was acting immorally. Hyuk pretended not to know what he was talking about. After looking at the monarch, the woman asked what he was even trying to accomplish. That was crazy. Does he want to subdue them, or is he seeking quick enrichment? Hyuk just looked at her and smiled. Finally, he said just one phrase bait. The girl opened her eyes in surprise and didn't realize what he was even talking about. Jane questioned him if she had heard everything accurately. The monarch nodded his head and continued to smile. He'd set the bait, and they'd take the bait like docile fish. That was the plan. But Jane still didn't understand what the plan was. In the auction room, continued bidding bids reached up to space. 31.5 million here circled just crazy money. Richard Paulson was determined to buy the hammer and was raising the stakes by the minute. He didn't spare any money to get this treasure. Looking at him, Michael, he couldn't believe that some other man would wield his hidden weapon. Suddenly, Manwha raised his hand and made some kind of cosmic bet of 200 million. Everyone fell silent. No one dared to bet more. The German looked at everyone with a lifeless stare. The auctioneer asked if anyone wanted to raise the bids, but everyone was silent. So young, went to the representative from Germany. Michael looked at him with a sizzling look. He couldn't let that happen. Eventually, he got bolder and raised his hand and made the next bet, 210 million. He was ready to part with all his money. The auctioneer happily announced the bid and asked if anyone wished to raise it, but everyone was silent. The other participants just looked at Michael and could not believe that he was willing to spend such a huge amount of money. No one dared to say a word. The Briton gave everyone a triumphant look. The auctioneer congratulated him on his purchase and announced that the hammer would go to him. It was time to move on to the next subject. The man turned to his assistant. The girl brought up the next item of the sword of the son's favor that had previously belonged to Richard. As soon as the American saw it, the man's heart raced. It was his weapon. He couldn't pass up the chance. Michael was now looking at him with a predatory look in his eyes, and there was nothing good in those eyes. The man shamelessly raised his hand and made the next bet 200 million. Richard looked at him with a frightened look. The man couldn't let this man take possession of his weapon. He grabbed his head and began to think hard. The bidding continued. A few hours later, the auction ended, and the bidders went to their rooms, and only Richard walked down the empty street. Suddenly, there was Michael's voice calling his name, and Richard immediately turned around back. The Briton appeared out of the fog and was approaching him from the back in a fast gait. Richard already foresaw something bad. Approaching his opponent, Michael looked like a beast. His eyes glittered with hatred. He was ready to destroy the American. Trying to keep his voice calm, Richard said that he didn't think they had any unresolved questions about what the matter was. And besides, because of this man, Richard had to spend over 200 million, so he's still in the red. Unwilling to back down, the Brit roared that money was not important in his eyes, glittered real anger and hatred. Richard had managed to make him very angry, and so Michael now pulled out a small dagger and lunged straight at the man. Naturally, Richard was not going to give up so easily, and with the help of his glove, deftly repulsed the attack. This Briton is always making a big deal out of nothing. Resentment took hold of Michael's heart. He asked, "Since when did an American think he could behave like that?" Swinging his shiv, he shouted that today was the last day Richard would walk on this earth, but the American managed to dodge. This was followed by a powerful straight punch that threw Michael far back, causing him to spit out several teeth. After flying a few meters, hit the ground. Now Richard stood in front of him and said, "Let him not forget that even in that world, Michael, I am not his equal." The American smiled. "And nothing will change here either. He's still stronger and faster, even if he doesn't even try." The bruised Briton could not bear such insolence, and jumping to his feet, immediately rushed into the next attack. Swinging the knife, he launched a huge energy wave. Thank God the American managed to bounce away. After such a powerful blow in the nearest wall was a big hole, there was a distinct smell of scorched earth everywhere. Realizing that it seemed that a fight could not be avoided, Richard drew his sword and prepared to attack. If it was such a case, he would at least have some fun. It looks like this is the point where their childishness ends, and the serious fight begins. American got ready. Michael was ready too. He held his hammer and came closer and closer. Now they were going to fight at full strength, and who knows how it would end. Richard was the first to strike, and he rushed at his opponent, swinging his sword. Grabbing his hammer, Michael ran towards him. Now, if they clash in battle, they will destroy this entire castle. And at the moment when the blow should have happened, nothing happened. They just missed each other without taking a single bit of damage. Infuriated by this turn, Michael shouted for his opponent not to give in to him, but the American thought also why they were not fighting. If this is the case, we should fight in hand-to-hand combat, Richard thought, and delivered the first powerful blow with his fist. The Brit wasn't far behind either, and landed a powerful uppercut on his opponent. Richard backed back up. Both men stood there and understood nothing. Why their weapons were completely useless in a fight. They examined them, but everything was fine. What was even going on here? Richard couldn't understand anything. His sword looked normal, but it wasn't doing any damage. For a few more seconds, they stood looking at their weapons, trying to figure out why they couldn't be used in a normal fight. All this time, the monarch was watching them from the window, a smile on his face as he smiled at the bait they had taken. On the table lay the favor of the sun, and beside it stood the infuriated American. Why didn't the monarch tell him that? Why couldn't you say that you can't use your weapons yet? He knew everything. He didn't say anything. Pretending not to understand, the monarch said he didn't tell him to buy the weapon, so why the complaint? It would have been worth checking before buying if he had enough attributes. American realized the baselessness of the accusations. The man sighed heavily. He had no other option but to agree. So what this monarch wants? What could he even do to get the monarch to help him with this? Hayuk looked at the American with a serious look. Thinking he said there was one favor he would like, the American clenched his fists and prepared for the worst. Hearing the monarch's request, the American opened his mouth. Hayuk said that in America, now there are many dungeons that no one can clear, and he is ready to take them up. Hayuk sat in front of the American and smiled radiantly, but Richard did not understand anything. The man came to be horrified at such a request. He has no power to decide such things. Even with his influence, it is almost impossible. He didn't know how it was done in Korea, but in the United States, the sweep is controlled by the state. The monarch just stared at him. The hero said that's why he was asking the American for help. Richard almost swallowed his tongue. He didn't understand how he was going to solve this issue. After a moment's thought, Hyuk replied, "Let them do so if they saw the point of the monarch's existence." In complete confusion, Skoy American left the office. He did not understand how to do it, because this is the management of the country and not trivial children's toys. To his surprise, he noticed the rest of the crew sitting right there monarch, that they too had been blackmailed. His suspicions were confirmed when the German asked about the monarch blackmailing the American Richard became even more grim. Looks like the masked monarch outplayed them all. Richard hated to admit it, but he did. The British man went on a rampage and started smashing everything around him in anger at how dare this masked clown lead Michael around by the nose. The British man was like a beast. Whatever it cost, them just need to put a stop to it. The man drew his weapon and started waving it around. Suddenly, Richard said in a completely calm voice that he didn't know if Michael was really that stupid or just pretending. The American spoke calmly, saying if he had any consideration in his head, let him think hard. He thinks he can at least scratch the monarch with his penknife and not make the rest of us laugh and embarrass ourselves. Michael cooled down a little, but there was logic in the American's words. He could do nothing against the masked monarch. Richard suggested that they think it over carefully because the task is serious and there is no way out of it. We need to think hard about whether we should grab that rotten helping hand or let it go. There was silence between them for a second. Nobody knew how to start the conversation because the situation was not the easiest. Several demons swinging their ugly clubs swept straight at their victims in an attempt to destroy them. With one powerful blow, the demon destroyed the skeleton into a pile of bones. But suddenly, Monster found that he was about to be attacked. On the face of the demon was frightened. Monster stared at him with distraught eyes. The skeleton's armor sword swung straight at him, and its empty eye sockets burned bright red fire. The necromancer was in charge of the whole thing, all on an infernal horse that was just a skeleton, and it looked terrifying. Suddenly, the monarch appeared and called out to him. He said that the necromancer was truly incredible. Dealing with the Bariaki alone is truly impressive. Su-chan still wondered, why is Monarch doing all this? Doesn't he have enough money? Yuk laughed, necromancer, that he constantly communicates in this manner. Still, he wondered why the Monarch had asked all the representatives at the auction for such nonsense. It made no sense. If players get stronger, then will it be easier for me to survive? And why would there be heroes on the other side? The Monarch laughed at his disposal indeed had an incredible amount of equipment, but if you think about who he could give it to, more than 1 million people have gotten into the game, and Monarch just can't physically provide everything they need. So you have to choose. After all, sooner or later the players themselves will have to become stronger whether they want to or not. Survival depends on it. The Necromancer understood in principle what the Monarch was talking about, but it still didn't answer the question. The Monarch's eyes were filled with the recent events when he lost the closest person to him. When he lost his entire crew, while they were trying to get him safely away, it was all horrible. In front of his eyes were all those images from the recent battle where he had lost everyone he knew and loved. He remembered how he himself stood almost exhausted and tried to just survive while the lifeless bodies of his comrades lay around him. At that moment, he felt like the most miserable person on earth. He was completely alone, having lost everything he had. When he stood in front of a demon so all-powerful that even getting close to him was a very big accomplishment. And also, the hideous smile of that monster so nasty that it was unbearable to even look at him. Now was his only chance to finally get even for all that he had endured. He didn't want to lose, not this time. Tonight, the news channels showed that the Necromancer single-handedly mopped up a heavy Bariak road. It was an incredible event. The masked soldiers were successfully attacking in the Bolo wastelands, and the success of the soldiers was unbelievable as they conquered new heights. The Monarch has become a national hero, and South Korea is the epitome of player power, with players from all corners of the globe gravitating here. The JVP group's office was in complete chaos. They still couldn't make contact with the masked monarch. It was simply unforgivable. The man burst into screams because South Korea was being watched by the whole world and he didn't care about anything. On the island in the distance could be seen a silhouette standing on one of the mountains. It was a tropical land where eternal summer reigned. Hyuk went into the water up to his knees. A smile shone on his face. He finally felt happy. His plan is coming to fruition. Looking at the beautiful sunset, the boy thought it was just a great time for a walk. Maybe he should have taken a picture and put it on his screensaver. Suddenly, the phone rang to him. The guy immediately picked up the phone. It was Jane. The girl asked how it is to be a star of the world, she was called, and the United States. In Las Vegas reigned total devastation from the former city of entertainment. There was nothing left, only ruins and wasteland. The warship plowed through the ocean, firing its large-caliber guns at the monsters. The main headquarters was in a state of turmoil. It was impossible to make eye contact. They were trying to contact the airplane. The pilot reported that the visibility was almost pouring. Everything was covered with dust and fog. It was impossible to see anything. There was no other way out. We had to go to Plan C, namely the assault military, and heavy artillery were already moving in the sky, flying airplanes. A whole column of tanks was moving straight towards the cluster of monsters, where there was a major hotbed of monsters that needed to be destroyed. Suddenly, everywhere began to sound explosions. Soldier did not understand anything. Tanks exploded themselves, reigned true chaos. The commander of the assault team tried to see something, but because of the cloud, nothing could be seen. The soldiers fell one by one. He tried to clear the dust from his eyes, but it didn't help. It was like he was in a fog, and there were monsters somewhere. Hearing the movement, the man grabbed his automatic rifle and started pouring lead into everything, but it was useless. The monsters were too many, and the group was broken. At the US airport, passenger planes were flying everywhere. There was a buzzing noise. Flights did not stop for a second. The monarch stepped out of his private jet and found himself on New Earth. Here he had a lot of work waiting for him in America. There were too many dungeons. There he was, already waiting for Richard. He met the monarch right next to the plane. Everything turned out as he wanted. The hero came closer and closer to him. The man stood surrounded by government officials. He had managed to organize everything after all, so he wanted to hear his address, at least a thank you. Monarch thanked him with a smile on his face. His plan was progressing just fine. They shook hands, and Richard wished him good luck, because the case was very serious. Soon, they were on their way to the scene of the accident. Richard said that the monarch probably already knew that the situation was worse than ever. For a long time, the 5 strongest guilds have been raiding this place. But unfortunately, all to no avail. Monsters are too many. With an understanding nod, the monarch frowned. The situation was very bad indeed, so there would be more work than expected. In a concerned voice, Richard said they were very lucky, as their government had approved the operation after all, but it was still difficult. The man turned his head back to the 2 others. Richard looked at them with an extremely displeased look. There sat Necromancer and Lilith the Demoness, started whining that she was hungry and wanted ice cream, and the Skeleton Lord just grudgingly asked what he was looking at. Looking at the monarch with some skepticism, Richard asked if he was sure these 2 could handle it. Hayuk looked at him and said that the masked soldiers had a lot of things to do in Korea, so he had to get out of it and take them. The soldiers are busy with other dungeons, so there is no choice. Richard simply remained silent. Still, the man boiled over and began to shout. It seems the monarch didn't quite understand the hundreds of people there laid their heads down. This place is not to be underestimated. The monarch just listened in silence. Suddenly, the necromancer perked up. He said he didn't understand English well, but whatever Richard told me, he shouldn't worry. Looking at him with his fierce gaze, the necromancer added that he never loses, so there is definitely nothing to worry about. In his head, he mixed up some incomprehensible people. Not even being soldiers will destroy monsters. It was more like a joke. A small drone flew over the deployment site where many people, and especially reporters, had gathered to see the monarch with their own eyes. As soon as the superhero came out, people immediately got their cameras ready and shrieked in surprise. Here he is the highlight of the program. The monarch moved forward with his subjects. The people immediately pointed their camera lenses at him, and there were sounds of flashes everywhere. The ubiquitous journalists tried to ask questions, but the diligent guards pushed them back, and the monarch had too much to do to give interviews. Soon the superheroes approached the scene and were already standing on a small hill, watching the scene. Standing in front, the monarch circled everything with his scrutinizing gaze. The matter was indeed a large labyrinth. Despite even such a trivial name, this place was considered impregnable. Even in the eternal world, the strongest players surrendered once they got there. Standing behind Necromancer asked, "Didn't Monarch attack this place earlier? Why he was so surprised?" Hayuk replied that there are often changes in the structure of the dungeon itself and the nature of the behavior of enemies, so it is difficult to predict something. It seems like it's time to move out. The monarch has ordered everyone to get ready, but don't worry. Despite all these soothing speeches, Suchang still tensed up. He was in a different country for the first time. Yes, and basically in a place like this. However, the headmaster reassured them now he was on a completely different level, so he would fight at full strength. There was a knock on Richard's car, and a man with a disgruntled face rolled down his window. It was the head of their guild, Harry Bartland, who looked at his subordinate and asked them if it was just the 3 of them. In his characteristic manner, Richard replied, "Can't he see for himself?" Harry remained silent and ignored the rudeness. It still seemed to him that even for a masked monarch, it was frivolous to not be too relaxed about such a mission. Richard replied that he too had some misgivings, but that he would not interfere, but that he had little faith that this man would not succeed. And yet, one day long ago, the monarch was unable to pass through the labyrinth and was crushed by a crushing defeat, losing his arm. Soon, they were already down into the labyrinth. The necromancer was a little worried because of this fog. It was hard to know which direction to go. The monarch ahead warned that no one should let their guard down. Anything could happen here. They could get lost and then get eaten by monsters. It's not exactly encouraging for the company, but still. They continued to move forward. Lilith begged for ice cream. She was hungry, even though the girl kept whimpering. Eventually, the monarch ran out of patience, and he promised to give her 10 grand when they finished their mission. It seemed to work, and she shut up. The necromancer moved closer and wondered why the monarch even brought her here. She wasn't even human, but Hayuk reassured him it was okay. He just wanted to check something, and that's all. The necromancer looked at him incredulously. Suchan began to turn his head around. It seemed to him that they had been walking for hours, and there was nothing visible. Suddenly, he noticed something lying in the desert, and looked closer. What he saw shocked the necromancer. In front of him lay the body of the monarch. The man opened his eyes in fear. Goosebumps ran through his body. It was impossible. The monarch stood in front of him, very shabby and seemingly barely alive. Everything turned over in Suchan's mind. He knelt down beside his comrade and began to ask what happened, who had beaten him so. But to his horror, at the last moment, he noticed that a tentacle had burst from the body of the defeated monarch. But suddenly, his entire body shattered under a powerful blow. The necromancer only had time to jump to the side. Now the real monarch was already standing in front of him along with the demoness, and holding his hand out in front of him seemed to be his handiwork. They moved closer to the bewildered comrade, and Monarch reminded him that he had said to be careful, or something like this would happen. Lilith looked at him and warned him to be careful, but the necromancer just kept silent, embarrassed by this. Suddenly, through the fog, they saw a lantern, shining with a blue glow, but it was unclear where it had come from. They came closer, and the necromancer didn't understand. So the whole time they were looking for some kind of lantern. Hyuk Po hastened to explain that this was a very difficult location, and it had once taken him 3 weeks to find the entrance. He picked up the torch and walked closer to the lantern, and that he managed only thanks to a clue in town. The boy lit a torch and held it out to the necromancer. The fire burned with a bright blue light. The monarch frowned and said there would be more of these lanterns to come, so keep your eyes peeled. And they should only clamp the 3rd, 4th, and 7th torch. The necromancer stared at the torch with an uncomprehending look. Of course, it sounded not difficult, but at least incomprehensible. Monarch moved forward, the others followed him. Suchan said let the monarch then light them himself. Why did he give the lantern? But the guy replied that he had something to do too. Then turning around, he added in a serious voice, no matter what happens, the main thing is to just light the lights and ignore it. The sorcerer's mind was all jumbled up, and for a second, he froze in thought, unable to understand. After a few minutes of searching, he reached the 3rd lantern and had already prepared a torch to light it. As soon as the necromancer lit the right lantern, the whole area began to shake, as if an earthquake was about to start. Then he remembered his boss's words to just ignore whatever was going on, and light the lantern's need to be calm. He then brought himself to his senses, and quickly galloped to the next lantern, just ignoring whatever was going on. He had finally reached the 7th lantern, and had already extended the torch forward. He was supposed to ignore everything, just going for the goal. As soon as he lit, everything around him began to clear, the fog was gone, and you could finally see normally. It turns out that he did everything right, and now a huge pyramid appeared in front of the necromancer's face, on top of which the crystal shone. Turning back, the necromancer wondered why it had taken so long for the others to show up. But looking closer, he saw 2 figures looming somewhere in the distance. It was the monarch with his demonic friend. Alive and well, the boss looked at his subordinate with the same serious gaze. Surprised, Sucheng asked where all these monsters came from. The hero replied that he also did not waste time, and this is the result. But you can't relax. There's still a lot of them, so let him keep his eyes open. The monsters started attacking out of the blue. Seeing this horror of necromancers, cried out for them to wait. He needed a little more time to come to his senses. It was over pretty quickly, and the team already entered the tomb where their target supposedly was. Going down the steps, the necromancer noticed that it was much quieter than he expected, as if he were in some kind of crypt. Turning to his ward, the monarch told him to be careful. There are many traps here and hidden ones at that. Even if he's around, the rest of us shouldn't let our guard down. There's no way of knowing where they are. With a smile on his face, the sorcerer said that he was in great anticipation. Before what was coming, his eyes even lit up. After just a few seconds of making one careless step, he almost got caught by a few arrows flying near his face. Thank goodness he wasn't hit. The arrows just stuck into the wall. The monarch turned around and reminded him that he had warned him to be a little more careful after all. This was followed by a huge mace that flew again near the sorcerer's face, and he was able to react at the last moment. Monarch. Looking at all this, he asked if he realized that he was making extremely unusual noises. The necromancer mumbled guiltily under his breath. Was no less sophisticated, it was a pit with spikes. As soon as an inattentive person stepped in it, he was finished. The next second, there was a massive explosion of how many of these traps someone had tried very hard to set up here. The monarch and the demoness looked at their comrade with extremely dissatisfied looks, whether he would get out of here alive or not. The necromancer himself seemed to doubt it now, and behind his back stood an army of undead, ready to execute the order at any moment. 2 doors appeared before his eyes, each of them likely leading to a different end of the tomb, and the monarch grinned. Hearing that they had to get out of here in 30 tries, the sorcerer grew cold with fear. It was no longer funny. In front of him stood several huge demons. Their faces were, to say the least, they were friendly. Nothing good could be expected. With irony, the monarch said that if they were unlucky enough to encounter a whole bunch of monsters, Sucheng just laughed. Such triviality will not deter him. The man has already prepared his staff to destroy the army of monsters. But Lilith was ahead of him, and quickly flew straight into the crowd of monsters. Everyone else just watched the girl in amazement. One of the monsters swung a weighty paw in an attempt to catch the pesky demoness, but missed. She was flying at a tremendous speed. None of the demons could catch her or even get close. When asked by the necromancer, "Who is this child?" the monarch advised to hold his breath, unless, of course, he wanted to show his shameful side. Meanwhile, the demoness was having fun flying around the army of monsters as if it was some kind of child's play for her. The necromancer opened his mouth in surprise as the monsters began to fall one after another. The necromancer looked at his companion in surprise and asked if this child was really a succubus. How could he even subdue her? He's that real genius. Hyuk just silently continued to watch what was happening. Monarch contracted for two things to find out if Lilith's spell works on monsters and if she could awaken by devouring their power. Finally, she finished. The monsters were already lying unconscious, and not much of a threat. All this took no more than a minute. Lilith didn't even notice how it was over and looked around in surprise. Then she shifted her gaze to the two boys and turned to the monarch. Now he would give her ice cream, right? He did promise. The first prediction turned out to be correct to confirm the second. "We need to wait for Lilith already," looked very displeased. The monsters were attacking again as if they knew no fatigue, and there were so many of them that there was no end in sight. For the necromancer, it was a true paradise. He launched his skeletons into the battle everywhere. The shrill of bones and the clinking of armor could be heard. Monarch just watched everything from the outside. The mop-up is going well, so there's nothing to worry about, just wait for the end. First, thanks to the power of Lilith, this girl was a rare ally, and she could easily deal with evil. Secondly, the necromancer with his skeletons was a huge help. Thanks to these two, they easily managed the sweep. Now the team was moving forward. The only thing left to do was to reach the target point, and we can consider everything a success. Eventually, they reached the place the commander was talking about, and in front of them was a huge hall with a crystal shining on top. It was like a gemstone. After destroying this crystal, a red chicory would appear. The necromancer immediately inquired how strong this monster was. The monarch replied, if he was lucky, he might win. The monarch frowned and added that this dungeon boss was not the kind of monster that was comfortable to fight against alone. In any case, they should start. The necromancer picked up his mace and prepared himself for something interesting to happen. But to his great surprise, the monarch ordered him to stand still and stay away. Suchan wondered, why would he? Answer the questions of the underlings. The boss replied that he himself will fight this monster, so let them stand still. Besides, the necromancer will have other duties. Hyuk didn't seem to be joking. His voice became more serious. So, let everyone do their part. The town was in turmoil at this time. Everyone was looking at their phones and opened YouTube. There was something incredible going on. People have never seen anything like this before. All eyes were staring straight into the monitors. People were waiting for the great battle. A man burst into the office and ordered his co-workers to open YouTube immediately because something big was about to start. People began to whisper why such a commotion. All eyes shifted to the shouting man. The monarch is now attacking the Great Labyrinth. It was an unmissable broadcast with over 30 million people watching. People couldn't believe their eyes and just opened their mouths in amazement that no one had ever done such a thing before. Probably a historic event was about to take place. The monarch, meanwhile, was climbing straight up the steps to the crystal with only seconds left. The hero stopped right in front of him and prepared to destroy. He gathered his thoughts. Now there was a very serious battle to be fought. He swung around, and with a single, powerful blow of his fist, he shattered the crystal into several pieces. A second later, the entire room was covered in smoke, and the silhouette of a huge monster could be heard through the shroud of smoke. In front of him stood the boss of this dungeon, a monster clad in armor and wearing a helmet with huge horns on his head. Hyuk stuck his hand into his spatial inventory and began searching for a suitable weapon. The guy didn't seem worried about what was going on at all. Then pulled out a scroll of distortion. This thing allowed the user to move to any convenient time and place. The monster felt his body vibrate. He didn't expect the man who awakened him from sleep to do something like this. The necromancer, along with the demoness, also felt their bodies begin to dissolve into the air. They were moving to another location. The broadcast showed that the team of heroes had moved into the desert, and now Monarch was standing in front of the monster. The tension between them must have become tense as the battle was about to begin, and everyone held their breath, waiting for something big to happen. Holding his phone in his hands, Necromancer filmed everything good. There were no problems with the use of phones, not dungeons, so everything could be captured. He kept wondering when the monarch had time to think it all through. It was genius. But Hyuk looked at the enemy with a lifeless look. The boss started to attack. First, he released 2 lasers from his eyes. Monarch saw all this coming and immediately bounced aside all the moves he already knew. The first phase of this monster is very simple. The monster started shooting laser beams at him. Monarch flew straight at him, easily evading all the blows. The hero was coming at him at an incredible speed, about to deliver his first blow. Needing only to warp space and make a melee attack, the monarch drew his sword and swung. Shikari immediately blocked the attack with a triangular shield. The clinking of weapons was heard. The air was filled with electricity. Striking one after another, the monarch realized that the shield around this monster's body was very strong and could repel up to 10 attacks. Simply put, unless it's an accessory that can use the jump at least 10 times, it will be useless anyway. With one swift blow, the monarch shredded Shikari's shield like a toy. The demon bounced backwards in an attempt to get out of the line of attack. Now comes the second phase of the monster. He began to change, as if dissolving into thin air, strengthening his body. In front of them stood a completely different monster, now that he looked like a centaur. And in his hands were two huge swords. The monster was laughing at his opponents. He stood on his haunches, his eyes burning bright green fire. Now he was going to trample these people like bugs. No one dare stand in his way. A heavy thump was heard in the air and a column of dust rose up. The ground began to shake underfoot as the centaur kicked its hooves right in front of the monarch. It was his third attack, and it was also foreseeable. With an easy dodge, the monarch bounced to the side. The monster slammed its horns right into the nearest rock, making a large dent in it. He was breathing heavily, smoke billowing out of his mouth. The monster was furious that some bug would dare to mock him like that. The monarch asked his underlings if they knew what to do. The hero was already preparing to strike next. He jumped up and swung the sharp blade just as the centaur's back was turned to him. It was the perfect chance to attack. Applying a critical strike, Hyuk released a shockwave into the monster that struck the monster in an instant. Shikari's whole body shuddered in surprise. Soon, the enemy was defeated. The items that fell out of him were Shikari swords. Quite a useful thing if you think about it. People watched in amazement and awe as the raid was over in just a few minutes. Monarch really was incredible. The audience didn't even realize what it was, just stared at their monitors with their eyes wide with surprise. Sitting in his car, Richard was shocked that the monarch had dealt with this monster so easily that he didn't even have time to blink an eye. The guild leader sitting next to him had assumed that Monarch was strong, but he couldn't think that he was that strong. Richard said that this dungeon is constantly being updated. Monster has not given up on life. He will fight other players again and again. The commander looked at him with a thoughtful look. Then there was only one option. Suddenly, Richard's phone rang. He immediately picked it up, and the phrase merfolk appeared, which made the man flinch. Richard looked worriedly in front of him and began to speak in a sort of muffled voice. He named places on the world map of the game, but the boss could not understand where it all led. Richard even mentioned the paradise island of Brarheim floating in the sky with a huge castle on it. The man asked what he thought would happen if all these places started to materialize in the real world. The boss was horrified it couldn't be. Richard understood that even a masked monarch with his power couldn't clean up these places alone. It was too complicated. It meant only one thing. The man was staring into the screen of the phone where a live feed with the monarch was being shown. The hero fought the monster with all his might, but Richard realized that in such a case, all players need to become stronger immediately. On the screen of the smartphone was an image of a horrible monster that looked like a goblin, but had 4 arms. The monarch looked at the monster with a pensive gaze, but it seemed familiar enough to him. Junior appeared behind him, and apparently seeing the confusion on his brother's face, asked what kind of monster it was. It was the first time he had ever seen something like this. Monster looked not only scary, but also vile. Its eyes were vacant. Hyuk explained to his brother that Junior had parted with his life before it started to happen. Min looked at him with a surprised look. Lowering his eyes, the monarch continued. There used to be a psycho who used humans and monsters to crossbreed them. After this phrase, Min visibly tensed up. It put him in a stupor. What does it mean to scramble down his back ran goosebumps. A horrible guess came to mind then. This monster is the result of some kind of mutation. Monarch confirmed it was like that, and it's too bad Edgar Gonzalez is back in the real world from the game, and that's a problem. On the streets of the deserted city wandered horrible monsters were orcs or goblins, but they looked completely different. The monarch looked at them from the side, his insides filled with disgust, for he saw before him a hybrid of monster and man. In a small house, there was a meeting of heroes. They were extremely worried about catching this Mexican, who had already subjugated several villages in a month. Michael was furious that Ruthless Psycho was using the players as lab rats. Now, that's a serious problem. The monarch just looked at him. He understood everything perfectly well, but for now, it was necessary to at least make a plan of further actions. He soon met up with Jane and began asking her about the scientist's whereabouts, but it was expensive information. The woman smiled and said that this time she would give him the information for nothing, but only once. Soon, the monarch came to some ruined house, opening the door with his foot. The first thing he saw was a man kneeling. He had crazy black eyes. It was the same Edgar with crazy eyes. Looking at the monarch, he said he wanted to use him as a test subject. The hero didn't say anything, and just swung his sword to destroy this monster before it did something else. And now the monarch was already sitting in the cafe. Jane came up to him and noticed that he was early. She immediately inquired how the photo that was taken during the battle seemed to come out while the woman was smiling. Without further ado, the monarch immediately asked the question. She had managed to locate the location. Jane replied that she was now looking into it closely. But ever since the hybrid had appeared in Japan, she had believed with complete certainty that their target was there. The monarch was very surprised. The guy asked if he could call Ryota. He's from Japan, so he should know. Sitting in his dojo, Ryota received a call from the Company of Darkness. He had already guessed who was calling, but only for what reason. He and his assistant were sitting near the entrance and brought the receiver to his ear. There immediately came a familiar voice. The monarch asked if the Japanese was familiar with Edward Gonzalez Ryota, and after these words he became visibly tense. He didn't expect the monarch to call him personally, and was even a little scared, but Hayuk kept talking. It seemed like this guy was in Japan right now. In any case, the monarch has decided to come in person to settle the matter. Ryota became visibly gloomy, and the matter seems to be serious since the monarch himself is coming. Jane looked at Hayuk in surprise. He was going to Japan. The guy replied that it was partly because of that, but there was something else to be decided. He would need to take care of some more business while he was in Japan. The girl only looked at him with surprise. A few hours later, the monarch was already in Japan and walked into Ginza, a private tattoo parlor where a woman was already waiting for him. The hero a little tense. After all, with this man, they have not seen for a long time. The guy said hello first. In front of him sat a girl named Kurihara. She was dressed in a Japanese kimono and had many Yakuza-like tattoos on her body. In Japan, there were very many tattoo masters. They had a skill with which they could bestow a certain power through their hands. This woman used monster blood for her tattoos, so they have a lot more uniqueness than the others. Kurihara looked at the guest in surprise, asking why this center of attention came here today. The monarch replied that she already knows and still asks. Why doesn't she join the Heroes Guild? He immediately started asking direct questions. The Japanese woman sighed. What an honor, after all, an offer from the masked monarch himself. The hero said he would bring her anything she wanted, just let her say it. The tattoo artist smiled. It was a very tempting offer. Besides, there are a lot of materials she needs. In any case, she was Japanese, and that meant something. The monarch tensed and looked at her even more closely. Kurihara said that people would by no means look well in her direction if she joined this guild. It was a very interesting offer if she would give up her country. To accept the offer, shouldn't he offer something better? The monarch tensed and pried open her eyes. Her request is the blood of the Demon King. Bail, this was certainly more than enough. Meanwhile, in the center of the big megapolis, there was a real commotion. People who heard a strange sound looked back frightened. It was the same hybrid monster that suddenly appeared in the middle of a large city. It started immediately attacking everyone. Ryota was the first to arrive and saw all the chaos as people mixed with each other, ran away from the monster. The master had already drawn his sword and prepared to fight. There were a lot of people, so he had to be careful. Without thinking, the hybrid lunged straight at him, exposing the long arm he had grown from his back. The man had a remarkable reaction, so he immediately ducked, leaving to the side. The hand landed right next to him. Jumping high up, the Japanese pulled out a shiny sword and with agility approached the monster within striking distance. There was a crackling sound, and he landed several dozen precise blows before the monster could even think of anything. At this time, the stranger was watching the scene, standing on the roof of one of the tall buildings. It was a man with red hair tied into 2 pigtails on his face. He had a smile. The spiritual swordsman impressed him. Several guards dressed in neat suits were on duty near where the temple master was. Sitting in his seat, Ryota was meditating as usual, focusing on the spiritual energy within his body, but the man already knew that someone had come to see him. The monarch was standing right in front of him, dressed in full parade, and it seemed the Japanese had already guessed what request Hyuk had come with. In a serious voice, the hero said it was the first time they had met together, just the two of them. Being a hospitable host, Ryota poured his guest a cup of fragrant tea, the smell of which immediately filled the room. However, the monarch refused. The Japanese was a little upset. He had, after all, prepared it especially for his arrival. Monarch decided to get straight to the point and asked his colleague if he had already looked into the hybrid situation or not. After drinking some tea from a mug, the master replied that they are already working on this case, but so far, there have been no results. The monarch even got a little angry. This is happening in their country at every turn. They don't even bother to figure out. He was the only one capable of doing so. The Japanese looked at him with a serious look and slowly boiled over. He realized his guilt and apologized for disappointing, but they don't get support from the Company of Darkness. The monarch grinned. That's the point. The hero told me that the monsters inside the dungeon have specific negative energy, depending on their type. Sometimes this mana is saturated, and there is an explosion of great power capable of destroying everything around. That's what they call oversaturation. The Japanese listened carefully to every word. It was new to him. The man asked why the monarch is telling this. The hero frowned. He knows that one dungeon that can't be cleared has appeared where the king lives. Ryota twitched. He said, what about that site in the center of town? The monarch said he was giving him 3 days. In a gruff voice, Hyuk said that the Japanese should find the hybridizer and bring it in just in that time. The man clearly was angry. He made it clear that the Japanese man had no idea what would happen to him if he couldn't do it. In the evening, there were many people gathered in the spacious hall, drinking refined drinks and talking amongst themselves. There was an event going on. A fat man in a suit stood with a glass of champagne and smiled. He was very happy with what was happening, because now he was a higher rank. Suddenly, he was called out by one of the people. The man turned around with a surprised expression on his face. The assistant congratulated him. Because the man had become the highest member of the department, the fat man laughed and thanked him without much enthusiasm. He said that as long as this award is given to people, he will try even harder. One of the aides told the chief to get ready. He had another visit scheduled. The fat man, accompanied by his assistants, was approaching the parking lot where a stocked Mercedes was already waiting. The deputy suddenly looked away from where someone was approaching him. It was a dark silhouette, with no face visible yet, but the man was dressed in the same dress suit and walked forward with a firm gait. Soon, the car touched down and was already flying along the night highway. Inside there was a conversation. The masked monarch flew to Japan. They sat together and talked. This fatty turned out to be the experimenter. He nodded and said that the monarch's arrival was expected. Ryota looked at him with serious eyes and said that this scientist should stop his experiments or there would be a glut in the city center. The scientist saw that the swordsman was very much concerned about the monarch's arrival. He was nervous himself. The fighter even says that the monarch may be the cause of the oversaturation. He is, after all, not really God or anything like that. There is no need to go that far. Ryota, who was already starting to boil, said that in that case, he would deal with him himself if Fatty couldn't get rid of him. The scientist replied, Ryota didn't seem to understand why they were even meeting here. The swordsman tensed. Fatty continued, Japan at this point lacks development. They are not yet capable of accepting the new generation, are they not? But the fighter was not going to give up hybridizing humans, and monsters is not a solution. It's a perversion. Smiling a wide smile, the mad scientist said that the person he knew would take care of the monarch himself. It was no problem. So let the swordsman not worry, but still it didn't bring any comfort. Ryota still remained tense. Making predatory eyes, Fatty said that if he gets a high position, then guaranteed Ryota will get prosperity, just need to do his job. After 3 days, there were still many of his wards on duty near the Swordmaster's temple, without letting anyone pass. They were Yakuza men. They were on duty here day and night. Nothing could escape their prying eyes. Ryota stood near the railing and thought after his conversation with the fat man yesterday, he was very concerned about his situation. The man's words were still floating around in his mind. If the oversaturation did occur, they could blame it on the monarch. But they don't know if it will actually happen, so let the swordsman make sure he's there to protect the king. In response to the concern for the citizens, the fat man said that they were best forgotten. The more people who went to the other world, the easier it would be to blame the monarch. Suddenly, the man's phone vibrated. He even twitched a little out of his thoughts. Called from an unknown number, had no desire to pick up the phone from a stranger, and the man just ignored it. Staring into the distance, the Japanese saw a tall tower standing somewhere in the middle of the city like a monument. This thing has only recently appeared. It seems to be the work of the masked monarch. He finally did it. Terrifying monsters, more like demons from hell, rushed straight at the humans and started attacking everyone. The monarch, along with Kurihara, stood looking out the window at what was happening so far, taking no action. The Japanese woman asked with some excitement if this was all really normal or if they should intervene after all. It seems it's about to get a little noisy, but the monarch just stared at everything in silence. He wasn't going to act early. After a little silence, he said that he had warned everyone else, but they didn't listen to him. If they ignored him, they would pay for everything now, along with their underlings, stood and watched from the back without saying a word. Several dozen monsters were approaching the humans. On their faces were madness and endless cruelty. This was the oversaturation. Oversaturation is when the mana in the body of a dungeon monster is completely saturated. This is also the reason why players are constantly mopping up monsters. If you know the basic principles, you can cause oversaturation artificially, e.g., make a tattoo of magical growth. Kurihara drew the necessary tattoo on Lilith's shoulder. The girl squirmed a little. It was slightly uncomfortable. It was a little painful, but it didn't last long, and a diamond-shaped tattoo appeared on the demoness's shoulder. As soon as the drawing was finished, the tower that stood in the middle of Tokyo exploded with incredible force, scattering shards of rock all over the city. As soon as people saw such a horrible sight, goosebumps ran down their backs. Something incredible was going on. After the explosion, they were immediately attacked by hordes of monsters. People were completely defenseless in the face of such a disaster. Standing between them, Ryota just watched. He already knew whose hands it was. The man was furious, but couldn't do anything about it. He received a call on his phone from MP Yasuhito, who was in charge of creating the clones. The man was incredibly pleased. The oversaturation happened exactly as the swordsman had planned. Looking at the TV, Fatty asked how the situation was. Ryota replied in a trembling voice that the situation was fine, but people were panicking. The politician hastened to assure him that the situation is under control. The more casualties, the better for them. Let all these people die for the sake of their bright future. Swordsman was silent. It was completely inhuman, but it was necessary. Meanwhile, people were in a terrible panic. They were running away, trying to find a safe place, but all was useless. One of the women fell, and the crowd started running past her. No one even noticed that the person had tripped. No one cared. The unfortunate woman felt the back of her head that someone was looking at her. It was a huge monster, already preparing to attack. The poor thing had already resigned herself to the fact that she was going to give up her life and clamped her eyes shut, ready to accept her fate. But suddenly, a vortex of some energy destroyed the monster. The woman was safe, but didn't understand how it happened. Standing in front of the stunned girl, Raida ordered the others to protect the humans from the chimeras while he dealt with the rest. His aides immediately rushed into battle, obeying the order of their superior. The men were armed with katanas. They swung their weapons and destroyed the monsters, one by one. People should stay safe. Here was a living hell. Chimeras were unbelievably plentiful, appearing literally out of nowhere. The guards couldn't quite cope. Ryota stood in his place, and one chimera was already flying at him. Opening its wide mouth, the man did not move yet. He only needed one easy movement to split the monster into two parts, and the chimera was destroyed. Suddenly, he received a call from the masked monarch. While continuing to destroy monsters, the Japanese asked him if he needed to know anything more. The monarch replied that this was his last chance. Tell him where the hybridizer is, or there will be a problem. The Japanese stopped, and the monsters jumped on him. Still, the swordsman broke down and said he would send the location. The monarch's cheery voice said there was something else to ask for. The swordsman's subordinate looked forward in surprise. Something strange was happening there. The man almost swallowed his tongue. For some reason, the monsters were returning to their places. They seemed to have lost interest in the humans, and were now going somewhere in the same direction. The guys looked closely, and saw that one of the monsters had a diamond-shaped tattoo. Kurihara looked admiringly at the invisibility cloak. It was an incredibly useful thing. The monarch said he could get a lot of them. The succubi were already in the process of sedating the chimeras to safely transport them to a remote location, while the humans let them stay safe. Japanese girl got a tattoo that can control these monsters, so looked like a real oversaturation. Monarch noticed that he too can cause oversaturation if he wants to, but you can't let innocent people get hurt, can't you? Smiling, Kurihara looked at the monarch. He does have a keen sense of justice. However, what he meant by who was hiding behind Raida's back, the monarch continued to watch what was happening. The woman didn't stop. Perhaps he was referring to the one helping the swordmaster. She was incredibly perceptive, and the monarch understood that. He remembered the fat guy who was always making mistakes around Ryota, and it was possible that he was behind all of this. What's more, Monarch hired a photographer to follow him around and dug up some very good dirt. Hayuk had long suspected that some important person had made a pact with Ryota, and it was impossible to ignore it. At that time, there could be a national problem. If the masked monarchs make a wrong move, it could turn into a disaster. He looked at Jane, who was talking to him through the video link. Then it would be easy. The monarch will just leave it to him to take care of his country. That will be the solution to the problem, so don't let him take offense. Somewhere far away, in an underground laboratory, were flasks with monsters immersed in some kind of liquid. A man in a white medical coat was tending to his guinea pig, most likely the same Edgar. The man heard someone come in and tensed up. He had already determined who his intruder was. There in the distance, silhouetted a masked monarch, and Edgar greeted him with a smile on his face, but it was fake. Hayuk and Kurihara had decided to deal with him personally, and were now standing right in front of the mad scientist's face. Monarch started a dialogue. He said that Edgar had better keep his head down, but the Mexican replied that he just couldn't do it. The monarch looked at him with a baleful look. It's still the same crazy lunatic experimenting on people. With this, he would be able to destroy this madman without a shadow of regret. The monarch put his sword forward and prepared himself. Edgar just looked at him with a lifeless stare and said nothing. He knew the end was near. Suddenly, the man took a large cigar out of his pocket and flicked on a lighter. He decided to at least smoke before he went to the other side of the world. He looked at his creations in the flasks. What a pity he could have created so many more wonderful specimens. The masked monarch and his companion looked around at this creepy place, overflowing with monsters. At last, the Mexican said that he had left someone to take his place after all and put a gun to his temple. The monarch, who had not expected anything like this, opened his eyes in surprise at what was going on and what he was going to do. The scientist pulled the trigger without a shadow of regret. The shot rang out, and he went to the other side. There was breaking news in Japan. There was a glut. People were excited. No one wanted to face the monster. Besides, Yasuhito has gone to the other side of the world now. Whoever was behind all these atrocities will no longer dare to interfere in people's lives. With a pensive look, Ryota read the morning news in the newspaper. His face grew darker. With every second, the situation heated up. Hyuk entered the international terminal, dragging a huge wheeled suitcase behind him. The guy moved forward as suddenly noticed a familiar face in the crowd and turned around for a second. It was Jane. She waved hello. As soon as she saw the old acquaintance, the guy walked up to her. Soon, they were sitting in a small cafe and discussing Yasuhito, who had taken his own life. The monarch added that except even mad scientists said something strange before going to the next world, it gave rise to bad thoughts. He said he'd already left someone to take his place, if that's the case. Who it might be, the guy tensed up. Jane wondered if it was really interesting, but maybe it didn't mean anything and was just some nonsense. The monarch had asked her to do it, but it wasn't like he'd summoned the girl just for the sake of it. Jane had already seen it. When she heard that the monarch wanted to find someone, she wondered who it could be. A smile appeared on her face. Looking at the old acquaintance with a serious look, Hyuk said that this mad alchemist was the person he needed. Somewhere in the slums of Hong Kong, two men were making an illegal deal, one selling the other a drug made from the body of a monster. Smiling a snow-white smile, the mad alchemist showed a pill and assured that this drug worked best. Suddenly, a stranger intervened in their conversation and said that in that case, he would like to buy it. As soon as the man saw who was standing in front of him, he immediately turned cold with fear. He definitely did not want to go to the other world. The alchemist shuddered and was about to run away, not wanting to go to jail for trafficking in illegal substances. He's almost done, after all. The man took a strange green ball out of his pocket and prepared to throw it. As soon as the bomb made contact with the ground, it was immediately covered with a vile green smoke and smelled of something foul. Standing in this cloud, Hyuk was beginning to feel annoyed. But why can't the question here just be resolved? Where did he wash off to? As soon as the cloud of incomprehensible smoke dissipated, the alchemist had already disappeared somewhere, and it would be difficult to find him. The man was running somewhere through the narrow streets in an attempt to get away. His whole body was shaking. The merchant couldn't figure out who this guy even was. He's from the police. If so, the alchemist is in big trouble. This stranger looked like a Korean. But what is he doing here? Suddenly, the face of the monarch appeared literally behind his back, and the guy confirmed that he was Korean. The alchemist sped up and ran away even faster as fear took over his mind, and the monarch just stared at him in surprise. Hyuk tried to reassure the man didn't remember him, but the Chinese man tried to get away. In front of his face were 2 boxes of bottles, and here was the escape route. The man immediately rushed toward them. He picked up the crate and threw it at his pursuer, hoping that it would somehow stop the annoying guy. However, without much effort, Hyuk threw aside the obstacle and ran onward after his suspect. But the guy didn't notice that there was also a vial of that nasty green liquid flying at him. A second later, there was a pop, and the entire space was covered in acrid green smoke. The alchemist stopped for a second. The man hissed. He didn't want it to end like this. Did this guy really go to the other side of the world? But there was no point in worrying. The monarch appeared right behind him and assured him that he was all right. The man almost had a heart attack. Turning to the strange stranger, the alchemist began to question how this man had even done such a thing. It was impossible. In a friendly voice, Hyuk said that the man probably didn't recognize him because he unmasked the alchemist, still didn't understand anything. Putting a hand to his face, the monarch put on a mask to make his identity clear. As soon as the merchant saw who was standing in front of him, he was even more frightened. The monarch himself was chasing him. Hyuk smiled. Finally, they met. Finally, all that was left was to have a normal conversation in a calm environment. The mad alchemist finally realized who stood before him and calmed down a bit, but the question remained as to why the monarchs were chasing him. They stood like that for a while, staring at each other, unable to say a word. A large cargo tanker was traversing the vast expanse of the sea. There was probably a very valuable cargo. Suddenly, the sailor noticed a strange island ahead of him. Had he been there before, he had to check the map. The captain himself shifted his gaze to the island. Indeed, it looked kind of strange. But when the sailor looked closer, his face covered with a mask of horror, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. The island was moving. In the memories of the mad alchemist once upon a time, the monarch brought him blue carrots and asked him to make 200 doses by the end of the day. The man looked at him with a surprised look. For the first time in his life, he had ever seen someone so powerful in his shop. Having obtained the necessary ingredients, the scientist immediately set to work. He sat for days and nights trying to create the necessary elixir. All the while, he was working hard on his work. His alchemy level was increasing with every second. The monarch visited his lab again and asked what ingredients were needed for the iron bear skin potion. The alchemist fell silent. The customer again brought him everything he needed, and the scientist redoubled his efforts, and his chemistry level rose to 500. He worked tirelessly. The man was very tired, but orders came one after another. His head was just bursting. Eventually, his face changed. Under his eyes appeared circles, and on his face, stubble, but his alchemy level reached the maximum. Now, they were sitting on an airplane and heading to their destination. The alchemist was furious. He was constantly practicing alchemy, and almost went insane. In a calm voice, the monarch asked if it was legal to sell potions made from the lifeless bodies of monsters. The alchemist shouted he had to make money. Suddenly, a flight attendant approached them and asked them to be quiet. Monarch smiled politely, and alchemist averted his eyes. Soon, they arrived at the place. The scientist said that in any case, if he was treated like that, he would leave the monarch, assured that everything would be fine. At the airport, no worse for waiting for Min, he saw the older man and waved his hand. The monarch turned around. He cheerfully greeted his younger brother, who stood and smiled, looking at his brother and the legendary alchemist. He approached the man and said with admiration that he knew the scholar was making over 100 potions a day. The alchemist said it was extremely difficult. Then the brother turned to the monarch and asked if he had seen the news. Hyuk looked at the younger man in surprise. Min opened his eyes in surprise. Didn't he brother not yet know? But it seems that the monarch didn't suspect anything. There was a news program on TV, and the announcer was saying that many players were now gathering here. An island in the Pacific Ocean was an event whose appearance was also unpredictable and true. In the middle of the water surface was a real island. The guys looked back at the TV. The announcer kept saying every player thinks this is the start of the festival. This phenomenon, called Mysterious Island, appears every decade in the Pacific Ocean and disappears exactly 30 days after its appearance. The island itself is a huge dungeon. You can earn skill points by clearing such places, which is used by experienced players. Using earned skills, you can buy a lot of great equipment. Yes, and just enrich yourself to the point of impossibility. It was one of those events that players could not miss in any way and immediately headed there all at once. On the island was already a lot of people as well as monsters, which by the way were friendly and served as NPCs. Finally, Mysterious Island appeared. Magic Castle and Heavenly City might also appear soon if things continue at this pace. Manuel had come there too, and now looking around it was unusual to see the island in real life. All the people were very excited and waiting for what was about to happen. They were getting ready. Galayev also twirled his head. He said that it was no different from a normal festival. Standing next to the Witch of Departed Souls confirmed. She asked her companion if he had already decided where to go. She had a smile on her face. Jan, with a smile on his face, replied that for the time being, he would enjoy his vacation here. There was no need to hurry. In a surprised voice, the Witch Po wondered if her companions were too relaxed, since this event was quite rare. In response to Galayev's question, the woman asked why he was asking such obvious questions, since he himself knows very well. In this world, where the most important thing is this power wouldn't battle. Grand be the best choice on a mysterious island, they stood in front of a large coliseum. The stadium was crowded with people everywhere. There was an incredible shouting in the arena. The battle was already boiling. The muscular man with a crazed expression was destroying the monsters one by one without much difficulty. There were two of them holding sharp swords, and several monsters were already moving towards them. Suddenly a gong sounded, indicating that a break had been announced. Everyone stopped. The man looked at the dial. Two guys sat in the stands and laughed. He didn't even make it to the fourth round. Red Claw is also overrated. Suddenly a voice was heard behind their backs, asking them to be a little quieter. They were talking too loudly. Behind their backs, Lou sat and irritably said she wanted to concentrate. As soon as the guys saw her, they immediately freaked out. The woman watched the fight with a thoughtful look as soon as the boys realized who was sitting in front of them with fear. Everyone else also noticed the spectacular woman and immediately started discussing her, forgetting about the duel for a moment. The spectator said that as far as he knew, she had reached a record 23rd level. No one had ever managed to defeat her. But it looks like that record will be broken today. The guy looked with surprise at the arena where a new contestant had already entered. He was finally here. Richard himself stood in his armor and prepared for battle. The man was fully concentrated on his future fight. His face was stern, and he paid no attention to anyone. Memories of when he had already been in this arena only in the world of the game, the battles here were a living hell. Even he could hardly stand it. Then things turned out to be much more complicated, perhaps. Because of his inexperience, the man suffered many injuries. On the ground lay a defeated monster, clad in armor of rage and hatred. The sight was not a pleasant one. But now Richard was stronger than ever. The man was firmly confident in his strength. These monsters would be no problem for him. As soon as the round began, one of the demons immediately rushed at him, swinging a huge club. Richard only needed one deft move to split it in two, and the monster cracked and roared. In the next strike, he slew 3 monsters. At once the fighter played with them like toys. Then Richard jumped up and readied his sword. There were already several monsters down there trying to catch him. After waving his weapon several times, Richard threw forward several energy waves and destroyed a dozen monsters at once. Soon, the first round was over. The fighter had easily handled the monsters. He victoriously looked around the stands. As soon as the next gong sounded, a horde of demons immediately rushed at him, and the fight didn't stop for a second. Richard knew that the masked monarch had reached the 29th round, and now determined to break that record, the man tried his best. His face expressed only fury. He saw nothing but his goal, and now no one would be able to stand in his way. The stands burst with excitement. Not often. They had seen such a spectacle. Was mesmerizing. Richard fought like a beast. 21st round was going on. Lou sat on the bleachers and was bored. She was disgusted by the show-off and what he could get from the masked monarch. The woman looked at the fighter. No need to guess. The blessing of the sun. I can see why he fights like that. The round is over. It was already 28 rounds. Behind the spectators could not believe their eyes. Could Richard today be able to beat the masked monarch? Suddenly, the next opponent appeared. He was much stronger than ordinary monsters. It was a knight, clad in dark armor. One of the spectators suddenly heard a voice behind his back. It was the armor of the idea cult of the Cathedral Knights, surrounded by his bodyguards and said to be one of the 13 knights of the top Adelio Holy Executioner. The man looked forward and concluded that this knight here is the strongest. To defeat him will be a very difficult task. In addition, this knight is one that even the masked monarch himself cannot defeat once he has fought in this arena. However, Richard was of a different opinion. He took out a vial of potion and drank it all in one gulp. His body lit up from the overabundance of energy. The man got such a rush of strength that he was ready to roll mountains. But no sooner had he felt the full force of his power than the executioner was already moving on him. Swinging his sword, the warrior only had time to dodge. At the last moment, he drew his sword and blocked his opponent's blow with a piercing scrape of metal. The impact was so strong that Richard even flew back a little, and a bright energy wave was already being directed at him. Of course, Richard was able to dodge, but behind him, the executioner was already preparing a lunge. The spectators were horrified for the first time in their lives. They had seen something like this. The battle was heating up with renewed vigor. It promised to be exciting. Adelio looked at his opponent through the mask there, his eyes burning with rage. Richard immediately rushed to attack. First, he put all his effort into this strike, but felt an incredible recoil from the dark sword. He swung his blade and delivered a powerful blow, but the knight was able to defend himself with his shield against the scraping of metal that made his ears pop. But Richard didn't give up. He struck with a new fury. The man wanted to defeat him so that it wouldn't become he had achieved so much. The stands froze in anticipation. They just watched such an incredible spectacle, unable to say a word. Richard's guildmaster simply watched his ward fight and didn't say a word. The holy executioner had already drawn a huge blade to destroy his opponent. They fought almost as equals. Even though Richard had a lot of strength, but even he was tired of resisting, the man was breathing heavily and was already preparing for the next throw. He took out of his pocket a scroll of courage, on which was drawn a small pentagram. It should help. As soon as he tore the scroll, his strength, endurance, and bravery increased by 5 units. The problem with his opponent was that he blocks all attacks without exception, but there must be a way. Richard rushed forward. The executioner lowered his shield during the attack, and that was something to take advantage of. He approached his opponent and delivered a powerful blow that was immediately blocked. Knight prepared to attack. There was an explosion. The spectators tried to close their eyes. From the dust that rose into the air, they looked in horror at what was happening. The guild commander opened his mouth in surprise. He didn't expect things to turn out this way. Richard was unbelievable. Lou stared at her colleague in surprise. She hadn't expected this man to have such great stamina. Did he really manage to win? So far, at first glance, Richard looked quite healthy. He continued to hold the weapon in his hands. But not even a couple of seconds passed before the man's mind went blank, and he slumped to the ground without strength. The round seemed to be over. The executioner was closing in on him and was getting ready to end this battle. Richard could do nothing. A beep sounded indicating that the player was no longer able to continue fighting. Richard was unconscious. The fans were terrified that something terrible was about to happen, and the boys opened their eyes in surprise. The doctors appeared and carried Richard on a stretcher to the infirmary. The man slowly began to regain consciousness and didn't want to accept his defeat. What a pity he was so close after all. But instead of him, someone else very familiar entered the arena. It was the masked monarch. He decided to take part in the battle. The kid in the stands was delighted. His eyes widened to the limit. He didn't expect to see the monarch. But that was it. The masked monarch was the next participant in the duel, and he stood fully prepared for battle. A few dozen monsters were already running towards him with their wide, ghastly mouths open. The first round began. At this time, the market was buzzing with activity, with many people discussing the fight and making their purchases. Kurihara looked around the merchandise, looking for what she needed. Her face was full of concentration. Standing nearby, Min asked with incomprehension, "She really buys this junior had already managed to become a sunset swordsman and spoke Japanese." The guy scratched the back of his head and said that he had studied this language, even though it was a nickname his brother had come up with. It was still kind of awkward. Japanese woman asked, "Where are the others?" Min replied that the team members most likely went to score points now. "The butcher and necromancer are probably in the lava dungeon right now. They are most likely fighting the undead." Michael Chan, aka the Mad Alchemist, said he'd go to a casino to place bets. He was an avid gambler. Sighing heavily, Kurihara said that everyone enjoys this place. They moved together through the market. Min replied, "The island is an opportunity for everyone. If you have points, you have the opportunity to buy many rare items that helped in battle." The woman nodded her head in agreement, all the same. There was a strange expression on her face. She was preoccupied with something. Still, the boy dared to ask Kurihara, looking for something specific. The woman replied that she didn't want to offend anyone, but she was just having fun. In that case, the younger one asked if she wanted to go with him to see the tournament where his brother was participating. There should be interesting. The woman asked if it would be fun. Min nodded readily. Of course it would be exciting. It's probably going to be the biggest event on this island, so it's definitely worth going to. The Japanese woman looked at Ming in surprise. She seemed to be interested, so she agreed. At this time, Richard was brought to a resting place. The man lay with his eyes closed and tried to recover. But he couldn't stay in one place for long and got up from the bed. His whole body ached after such a strong blow. His memory was finally starting to come back to him. It seemed he had passed out during the fight and was brought here. His body could not withstand such a load, and unsurprisingly, the opponent seemed very strong. His thoughts were interrupted by a goblin-like beast, but it seemed to be friendly. It was a hospital employee who greeted the patient with joy. The staff member announced that for passing the 28th round, Richard had received 3,240 points on the creature's face was a smile. The strange creature kept on gibbering, and Richard understood nothing, and just looked into his eyes. His head was splitting. Eventually, the employee wished him a good time and left the room with the same smile on his face. The man still didn't understand anything, and even blushed with irritation. This weirdo just said it and took off. But still, he had no desire to sit here, so he decided to go and continue watching the round as a spectator. As soon as Richard stepped into the bleachers, the screaming of the spectators came to his ears, and he looked closer. What he saw threw him into a slight shock. It was the masked monarch. He was holding a bloody sword and seemed to be victorious. Richard was speechless at this and stared wide-eyed at what was happening, unable to move from his seat. It seems the unbelievable happened. The masked monarch defeated the executioner without any effort. It was incredible. The 29th round was over. The monarch had emerged victorious. He simply looked at his defeated opponent with a look of contempt. The final round began, and there was another knight, much bigger than the previous one, and as likely to be stronger. He had already attacked the monarch. Without any difficulty, the monarch dodged and struck his opponent directly into his mask. A clinking of metal was heard. The knight flew back a decent distance, but immediately prepared to strike a second blow with a roar from his wide mouth. Monarch didn't have time to dodge and flew straight into the wall. Da Knight lived up to the name of the final boss of the arena. But Hayuk didn't plan to give up. He pounced on the knight and began to deliver a flurry of blows. Everywhere the roar of the crowd could be heard. There was such an incredible wind that the people could hardly stay in their seats. The battle was even more exciting. Standing in the stands, Richard still couldn't believe it was really the masked monarch. He was now fighting the final boss. How could this be possible? But then the unthinkable happened with one deft move. The monarch separated his opponent's arm, and the knight was left unarmed. The hero used Dragon's Blood Awakening and prepared to send his opponent to the other world with a jagged blade in his hands. With an incredibly fast dash, he approached the knight and landed several dozen precise blows. A beep sounded. The round was over. The monarch emerged victorious and now stood in the center of the arena. The audience exploded at the sight, and Richard stood somewhere behind and couldn't believe his eyes. Hyuk looked at everyone with a victorious look. He passed the arena without much difficulty and satisfied his ego. Earlier, Hyuk decided to go to the gun shop to spend the points he earned. There were many different kinds of weapons. Some muttering of praise to him of the Ascension tribute of the new hero of the mysterious island reached his hearing. The monarch looked to the side and saw a hunched old man dressed in a cloak, probably the owner of this place. Saying that he had a gift for him, the old man presented the monarch with a strange book glowing with yellow light. It was a guidebook. It had several hieroglyphics written on it. The salesman invited me to choose anything, but he reminded me that you can only choose one thing. Hayuk took a closer look and chose wisely. The old man kept repeating that you could only choose one item on the pages of the handbook. There were many different kinds of uniforms. After a little thought, the monarch made his choice by pointing his finger at one of the items. The old man grinned and said in a voluptuous voice that he respected the monarch's choice. In front of the guy's eyes appeared a flask with a blue-colored potion. Just what he needed now was a potion removing limits. As soon as Hayuk drank the potion, he felt that his body began to change. Some incredible lightness appeared in his chest from where the light was coming from. He stood in the arena and enjoyed his moment of glory. The audience screamed she was in awe of her hero. The monarch shifted his gaze to the side and noticed that on the plaque was an inscription he had reached the 301st level. Somewhere in the depths of Russia, in his house, sat an artist and continued to paint an unfinished masterpiece. In the room reigned disorder. As soon as the man made the last stroke of the brush, the painting began to glow with a blue luminescence. The artist froze in place, unable to tear his gaze away. But unfortunately, after a few seconds, the painting began to crack and exploded into many pieces. The man lowered his eyes. Is this really the limit? An unpleasant feeling of longing and sadness settled in his chest. Suddenly, the phone lying on the table next to him vibrated and someone was calling him. Coming closer, the artist took the phone in his hands and looked at the screen. After a second, his expression changed. Several hundred kilometers away, a girl sat in a German workshop and worked hard. Suddenly, she felt that someone was in the workshop besides her. The girl tensed up, pulling back the box. In the desk, she started rummaging around in there and soon found a gun and a pack of ammunition. Armed, the girl walked around the workshop in an attempt to find the intruder. Her footsteps were as quiet as possible. Hiding behind one of the walls, she tried not to breathe. Somewhere in the back of the workshop, an unidentifiable silhouette was walking around. It was a man with a bandage on his head. In a stern voice, the owner of the gun said she would advise against making any sudden movements. The girl pointed the barrel directly at the intruder and asked how he got here and heard the click of the shutter. The man theatrically threw his hands up in the air and said pitifully that he had finally been noticed. It was Chol with a smile on his face. He said he wanted to call, but decided at the last minute to do a little surprise. The girl froze in place, but still held the gun by inertia. Lifting her glasses, she looked at the man with obvious surprise. It was an old acquaintance of hers, but what was he doing here? The action moved to Seoul to the Castle of the Mask. There were already burning windows and near the castle revival. A lot of people gathered. They walked the streets and had fun. The atmosphere was favorable. Inside the castle was lively too. They were celebrating their victory, all drinking and partying with a heavy cloying odor around them. Mad alchemist. Michael had already managed to get drunk and smiled a silly smile as he thought that the Demon King's place had long since been cleaned up. The girl blacksmith looked at the monarch with understanding. But why did you have to call this lunatic here? The alchemist resented such insolence. But all the alchemist heard was a threat that if he didn't shut his mouth, he'd lose his life. Dina Kruger was the girl's name, was a magic engineer, and now she stood pointing a gun directly at the mad alchemist. Chan recoiled with horror as to how she had even brought a gun here. The girl replied that there were many ways to do it. The blacksmith interrupted their conversation, saying they could greet each other later, but now was not a good time. The alchemist turned around. Sitting at the table with a cup of beer, Chul said that if the Demon King did show up, the monarch could handle him alone. Wizard Andrei Ivanov looked heavy look, means this tattoo artist is also here. The man was clearly displeased. Looking at him, the blacksmith inquired, what does he actually care about this woman? Why does he ask? The artist explained that they are both wizards. His subjects are objects, but the tattoo artists are living beings. It would be good to join forces. Leaning back, Chul said it was a good idea, and to let him know if he needed anything else. Dina said the first thing she wanted to know was what was on the monarch's mind. The woman frowned. The blacksmith's face changed. Well, if that's the case, he'll tell me, though he obviously didn't want to. Smiling and raising a finger up, the man said that you could say it was a kind of gun, a strange analogy. All three of them looked at him in surprise at what this old man was talking about. Many kilometers away in the Aegean Sea, the island of Crete was in total disarray. There were many lifeless monster bodies in the dungeon, and it was obvious that a monstrous battle had recently taken place here. It's not hard to guess that it was the monarch who was destroying the monsters one by one, waving his weapon. The monsters were getting bigger and bigger. They had already surrounded the hero and were preparing to attack again, but the monarch was ready. Lilith, who had been watching the battle, had already cast her spell and the monsters fell unconscious. The demoness laughed. She seemed to be having a lot of fun every outing she took as a game, so she constantly accompanied the monarch. Looking at her, Hayuk wondered if she was eating too much, but the girl said she was still hungry. What's the big deal? This place where the ancient remains of the Minoan civilization were found has now become a home for monsters. Because of all this, residents had to evacuate to the nearby town of Kalamata. They are here frantically waiting for results, staring at the TV screen. Everyone had goosebumps running down their spine of anticipation. Now the monarch, along with the demoness, were inside the dungeon in front of a huge statue of an unknown demon. It was one of the supreme demons. Asmodeus, his statue, was with several human faces and 2 animal faces. The demon lord continued to marvel she was having a lot of fun. She had already found some shiny thing. As soon as the monarch inquired what it was in the first place, the girl hid the finding. It belonged only to her. With a snide smile on his face, the guy told her not to worry. He wasn't going to take the thing away. He just wanted to take a look. However, Lilith looked at her comrade with disbelief. She did not want to part with her treasure. Still, she let her look, and the monarch carefully began to examine the pendant, holding it in his hands. It was a piece of jewelry with a large red stone in the middle. Most likely a magical item. This thing belonged to Asmodeus. Looking even more closely at the strange artifact, the guy squinted, even somehow pitiful for someone with the name of a deity. However, not everything is so simple. This thing will be an indispensable assistant for Lilith. By the way, the girl continued to look at the monarch unhappily. Hayuk handed her the bracelet and told her to put it on. The demoness gladly accepted it. As soon as the girl put the jewelry around her neck, it immediately began to glow red. Light demoness, even a little scared, looked strange. Hayuk asked her, does she like this thing? The girl jumped on the spot. It's very beautiful, just right for her. Then they moved on to finish cleaning up the dungeons, and there should be more treasures in the area. The monarch easily dealt with all the obstacles in his way with just one swing of his sword. On the way, the girl asked when things would appear after a little thought. Monarch replied that one should have appeared by now. Soon, they came to a long hall where there were statues of various monsters that looked kind of creepy. With a heavy sigh, the monarch said, it looks like this is the end. Finally, they got to the right place. Lilith was standing next to them. Turning around, he said she could wait here if she wanted to, but the girl shook her head. She wanted to go on with him. The guys moved forward past the statues of huge monsters. The atmosphere here was a bit creepy. One of the demons looked like a 70-second monarch devil. The girl shivered and said they looked pretty creepy. Suddenly, a strange sound came to their ears, and the two immediately turned their heads in the direction of the strange noise. No wonder that behind their backs already appeared monsters. They were a whole army. There were zombies and some demons in general full parade. Monarch said that these are the knights who sold their souls and became monsters. Surprisingly, there are only so many of them. Let them attack. He drew his sword, and a multitude of monster knights rushed straight at him. For the monarch, there were no barriers, so he easily dealt with monsters just by swinging his weapon. Lilith, who was watching all this, opened her eyes in amazement at the skill of her leader. With another swing of his weapon, the monarch finished behind him, and a loud explosion rang out, scattering the remains of the monsters in different directions. It seemed now it was time for the master himself to come out. The guy looked at the place where obviously the throne should be. And indeed, a strange silhouette was already looking at them from above. It was probably the boss of this dungeon. Before them stood a man with white, long hair and wearing some sort of ecclesiastical garb. It was the Grand Pontiff of Talon. In an instant, all the statues surrounding the travelers came to life, their eyes glowing red and the clinking of metal. Finally, he awakened. Monarch had already taken out his huge hammer from his shadow inventory and was fully prepared for battle. Seeing the uninvited guests easily massacring his army, the Pontiff launched several balls of dark energy in their direction. But no sooner had the demon taken a step than he was overtaken by the monarch, who stood behind him and prepared to strike. One swing of the sword was enough for the head to separate from the demon's body and gallop across the concrete floor. The monster was defeated. The monarch came closer on the ground. There was some jewelry on the ground. It was a reward for destroying the monster. It was the crown of Talon's divinity. Inside was a precious red stone this equipment gave, plus 100 points to the charm. The monarch already realized to whom this thing should belong and handed it to the demoness. It was a gift. Lilith immediately rejoiced. The girl put the jewelry on herself, and her eyes immediately lit up with happiness. Finally, she got what she wanted. Suddenly, an incomprehensible vortex of energy appeared near her, and for a second, the girl seemed to fall into a trance. The characteristics had changed. Now she felt even better. Her face was glowing with joy. Smiling, Hayok said he was glad she liked it. The demoness laughed. Her master is the best. She loves her master. A sign suddenly appeared in front of the monarch's face. It had certainly been a long time since he had seen her level hung on another. It was time to move on. The dungeon seemed to be cleared out, but Lilith didn't seem to want to go back and was surprised. She asked why they should fly on an airplane when they could do everything much faster. The monarch looked at her in surprise. The girl's face changed, and a snide squint appeared on it. She asked, "So are they finally leaving or not?" With some disbelief, the guy looked around at what she was even up to. Suddenly, everything changed. The monarch looked around and realized that he was in his office, but how could it be? But the demoness seemed pleased with her antics and chuckled echidnically. She had managed to impress the master after all. With burning eyes, she began to explain, "This castle is the source of her power, so she can come back here, wherever she is." The monarch is even a little taken aback. She's talking about it, only now laughed. The girl replied that he never asked. In a concerned voice, the guy asked, "Is there anything else he doesn't know?" Lilith thought for a second and started listing trivial things. However, there was something else. The girl said that she could move to a person when they were asleep, and that was interesting. Before the monarch could ask any more questions, the demoness disappeared into thin air, leaving him to wait here for a moment. 10 minutes later, they were in a strange place. In front of them stood Richard, who did not understand why they were here at all. The man was horrified at what they were even doing. Here the monarch also wondered what this demoness had now done. Lilith said she had penetrated the dream. Unfortunately, she can only do that with people she knows personally. Richard had been standing there the whole time, staring dumbfounded at the uninvited guests and wondering how they had gotten here in the first place. He finally dared to say something, and the monarch, along with Lilith, looked at him. It was time to explain. Hayek wondered if he could also enter dreams now. The demoness replied that she had never tried it before. Maybe now would be a good time. Realizing that they were not paying any attention to him, Richard began to boil with rage at what they were even allowing themselves. The girl began to fly through space. Finally, Richard came to his senses and yelled out what they were even up to. Why would they even teleport people out of their dwelling? The man was impressed and frightened at the same time. But the monarch just watched silently. After a little thought, Yuk said if he returned all the equipment of the members of the Absolute Guild, that would be enough. Richard was silent for a second. Seeing the bewilderment on the soldier's face, the monarch repeated that if Richard kept it a secret, Hayuk would return everything he had taken from them. Looking at him with a serious look, the monarch made it clear that he wasn't joking about it all completely. Seriously. Not understanding anything, Richard continued to stand and flap his eyes. It looked incredibly wild. With a fierce look, the monarch clarified that he hoped Richard understood what the consequences would be if he broke the treaty. In Abel Tower, there was a real massacre. Monsters attacked from all sides. They were so many that it was almost impossible to cope. One of the fighters could not withstand the onslaught and flew into the abyss, leaving behind only a pitiful scream. After flying a few meters, he fell to the ground. Several military men just looked at the lifeless body, unable to do anything. The commander turned to his subordinates and ordered them to prepare the next group. These were just weaklings. They didn't have time, so they had to hurry. In front of the commander stood the ragged people who had just miraculously returned from hell. The news anchor was reporting in a confused voice that the invincible tower had finally been cleared. This month alone, China has cleared about 8 dungeons that were considered invincible. People rejoiced. The president stood on the podium and smiled. The government will get a lot of funding for the players. It was a real achievement. The owner of the management bureau, Xiang Ling Pong, stood at his headquarters and held a bottle of resurrection potion in his hands. The aide, standing nearby, confirmed that they were able to bring a man with cancer back to life with the help of this drug. Continuing to wonder, Shang asked how the negotiations were going. The man replied, America had agreed to buy 320 pieces at $3 billion. The chairman's face became satisfied quite well. They will raise a lot of money on sales. The aide was quick to say that many players' lives are in danger because of these battles. After thinking for a bit, the chairman said that in that case, they could give them these miracle potions. The assistant was even a little surprised. However, after what the chairman said, the man was completely speechless. Sheng added that they would only supply them with potions if they paid 3.5 billion. At this time, a meeting was going on at the headquarters of the Dark Company. China has very big problems, but they only show the good side. The guillotine said it's not over. The blacksmith sitting next to him was outraged, and what does the government do when players are so easily sent to the other side? Min too was also outraged by the government. Even sending players without equipment to sweep locations is a horror after all. Kurihara lowered her head and said that half of the game's users were in China. That's why they were so successful. The government thinks they can throw people around like things, and at this rate, they're sure to keep winning. The monarch just sat and listened in silence. He did not like the situation very much because at this rate, China will overtake South Korea, and besides, it is inhuman. While in seclusion, the guy summoned Lilith. The girl appeared from the portal and immediately laughed with joy. The monarch asked if she remembered the lady who was in the castle. The demoness thought about it, but Hayuk reminded her. It was about the representative of China, Luo Xiao. She was a very strong and also very influential woman in her country. At this time, a message arrived on the Chinese woman's phone 2 days later at 7 in the morning, clearing the dungeon in the Gorge of Tears. The woman tensed up a bit, not worth accepting the offer, of course, but there was nothing to do now. Suddenly, she felt incredibly sleepy so badly that it was no longer possible to control her mind. She passed out. Perhaps it's because she's gotten very little sleep lately, but a familiar silhouette has already started to appear behind her. Turning around, the girl was horrified to see the masked monarch along with the demoness. But what are they doing here? Hayuk immediately brushed aside her question. Right now, it's not important how he got here. They have a serious conversation to have. His tone of voice suddenly changed, and the guy questioned the things that are happening in China is because of the association of the 9 dragons. Lo said that there was a place called Chou Inzhong. The monarch tensed up as he heard of something like that for the first time. The woman continued, when she returned to the real world, this organization already controlled all the Chinese players. When they met, the company made her an offer, and she unfortunately did not refuse, which she now regrets. After that, the company started indiscriminately sending all players to mop up invincible dungeons, even without equipment. This situation that is happening now in China is just a result of their greed, so there is nothing to be surprised about. Still, Monarch asked, isn't this 9 Dragons Association one of the strongest guilds in China to act so foolishly? In a sad voice, the woman replied that the whole point was that they actually had 9 leaders. Since opinion was then divided on each decision, she could do nothing, so there was no choice. Eventually, the 9 leaders were captured by this company and destroyed everyone who stood in their way. The 9 Dragons Association was defeated, they couldn't do anything, so everything was left as it was. In a heavy voice, the monarch asked how many people there consisted of. The Chinese woman looked at him over her shoulder. The expression on the hero's face changed. As they acted so foolishly, it was time to punish them. He was going to pay them a courtesy visit. The next day, the chairman's car was parked outside the association's office, with security guards circling it as usual. Shang walked outside, and while adjusting his tie, he walked straight to his office with a fast gait. At this time, the monarch stood on the roof next to the demoness and watched the whole situation from on high. Inside, there was a meeting. The chairman was questioning the workers about the dungeon sweep and how many items they had collected. Then he ordered the workers to contact the 9 Dragons Association to clean up a couple of dungeons about the players. Let them not worry. Smiling, the man said they needed at least a couple high-level items before reporting everything to their superiors. But suddenly something unexpected happened. One of the people present fell to the floor and seems to have lost his life. The chairman looked that way in horror. He hadn't expected such a brazen attack right in the middle of a meeting. The man tensed. Following this, the rest of the workers also began to disengage, and soon the chairman were left with one man trying to stand up. He tried to wake up his subordinates, but the people just lay on the ground unconscious. Their eyes were covered with a white veil. Shang wanted to say something else, but he didn't have time to say anything, as he was hit in the face by a powerful blow. The man fell to the ground and hit his head painfully. Naturally, it was the monarch. He appeared quite suddenly in his manner, and now stood over the crippled chairman. Soon, Fatty woke up and immediately began to look around fearfully. The man had taken a couple of hard blows and seemed to have a broken nose. The helpers woke him up with a bit of grief, and they all found themselves in some strange cave-like place. Touching his broken nose, Shang asked what even happened, but no one understood. They just happened to be here. That's all. By the way, there was no way out of here either, which made the chairman terrified. The man seems to have realized whose handiwork it was. He shouted that he knew who the monarch was, but still, how dare he treat him like that? One of his subordinates suddenly said that he heard some sound coming from the cave. Fatty was silent for a second. Suddenly, a laser beam appeared from somewhere in the darkness and flew a few centimeters from the fat man's face, leaving a scratch. The man standing behind him lost his head. There was only a handful of ashes. The lifeless body fell to the ground. After that, a roar sounded, and monstrous creatures began to appear from the cave. They were chimeras. The aides, along with the chairman, came to terror they did not expect to be attacked so quickly. Monsters began to grab people and destroy them one by one. Began a real hell. No one could resist such monsters. On the faces of people was a real horror. They did not understand anything and just became victims of the unknown. The fat chairman tried to run away, but one of the chimeras was already jumping on him. The man definitely wouldn't have time to do anything. It looks like this is the end. Somewhere on the street, the monarch stood and watched all that was going on. Finally, he was able to punish these arrogant people. He looked at the silhouette and the monsters that one by one were destroying these scum of society. Now he could get his revenge. The guy turned around and walked away from this cursed place. The deed was done. It was time to go back. The next day, the news broke near the gates of heavenly tranquility. There was an invasion of monsters. Citizens had to stay in their seats. Monsters were incredibly numerous. They came from everywhere. People just didn't have time to find a safe place. Lu appeared suddenly in her hands. She had a sword. The whole girl was wearing armor. Now she was ready to destroy the monsters. One of the demons looked at her with frenzied eyes and grinned its toothy maw. All at once, the monsters rushed at one woman. They wanted to destroy her once and for all. It was just prey for them. But no sooner had they reached their goal than they all turned to ash. Even the Chinese woman had to close her eyes. The vice president of the Kuryong community, Liu Haoran, stood with his monks. It was his job. The man made it just in time. Liu looked at him with a grateful look. After all, his help was just right. By the way, now they can easily destroy the monsters. The man ordered his fighters. Now they would destroy these monsters to the last man. He was the first to lunge at the monster called Drain. The man swung his sword. He was ready to destroy everything in his path. Watching all of this, Lu squinted her eyes. She couldn't let all of glory be taken away from her. In a second, the girl was already raring to go into battle in the thick of things. Now China will be cleansed of this filth. There was a huge explosion behind the temple, and a pile of dust rose into the air, and the sounds of battle could be heard everywhere. China has speculated that Xiang's disappearance is the work of players who are unhappy with the government's treatment of them. The reason for this rapid change was that members of the government became afraid lest one of them become the next target. Eventually, a new manager was appointed for the company to sort things out. It was Lu Xiaoyi, who was the woman who ascended to the presidency and promised to settle the situation. The masked monarch, being in Seoul, was very happy. This girl was not bad and was just right for the role of the president of the company. Suddenly, Junior appeared and asked, "What is this brother talking about?" The monarch was even a little startled. Min approached, very suddenly. The two of them walked up to a large building. It was a player's store. It looked really awesome. Most likely there was a lot of stuff in there. Indeed, inside this marketplace were so many goods that the eyes were dazzled by swords and performance-enhancing rings and armor. It was Min's first time in a place like this, and he swiveled his head in different directions. There were so many things here that it was hard to choose. But he wondered why they had come here after all. The monarch smiled and replied that he wanted to stop by once in a while. He really wanted to know how things worked that were created as a result of a combination of the game world and the real world. Soon, they entered one shop. The salesman greeted them cheerfully and offered them a wide variety of goods. Looking at one of the bottles, the monarch even laughed, surprised they had mixed the hair growth cheese potion with the potion. Walking up to the vendor's counter, the boy asked what their most powerful weapon was. The vendor immediately began digging under his desk. With pride, he drew his sword and said that this is the highest ranked weapon that has been created by collaborations with technology and the player community. Hayuk eyed the weapon carefully. Ignoring the endless rubbing of men, the seller said discounted for only 30 billion. Taking the weapon in his hands, the monarch took a closer look at the weapon, which looked beautiful, but how strong it was. As soon as the guy made one awkward move, the sword immediately broke in half. The merchant was horrified. This was the best specimen. The man was furious, but Hayuk was very embarrassed by the salesman. After all, he said it was the best weapon. But then the merchant was stunned when the customer who broke his item agreed to pay the full amount on the card. He handed the card into the trembling hands of the merchant and said that here he would pay all at once. Junior just watched it all with wonder. Chul came to the workshop with a suggestion to push the limits of his mana dark energy is the best. The employee said it's certainly good, but too dangerous. They make almost all guns using only white. His face changed, but white magic and dark magic just can't be combined with each other. Kurihara, who was standing nearby, noticed that the man's words weren't entirely true, even a little taken aback. The girl continued, "If you look at the abilities of her tattoo, it is similar to dark magic." The blacksmith, who came closer, noticed that it was a different expression on the man's face, visibly changed. Though she can use the blood of monsters to draw in the end, the powers encapsulated in her tattoo are mana. Standing next to Michael Chan said that then they need materials that can be combined with each other. Suddenly they heard the monarch's call and immediately came to his office. Hyuk was sitting in his seat waiting for them. On the doorstep appeared a team of blacksmiths, walked in front and cheerfully greeted the monarch guy, even surprised what kind of business they did not even knock. But it was not important now. Looking at the enthusiastic faces of his charges, the monarch was even a little surprised. Holding out a bottle with an obscure yellow potion to him, Chul continued to smile. Because cool, isn't it? But he didn't even bother to explain what it was. The monarch didn't understand what it was. If anyone could explain it to him, it was some kind of potion. The blacksmith laughed. Then his facial expression was clear that very significant. After the monarch heard that they had succeeded in creating a potion capable of resurrecting people, his eyes widened in surprise. Chal with burning eyes said, giving him a peculiar name resurrector bottle glistened in his hands. The team stood in front of their boss and proudly looked at the fruits of their endeavors after all they had accomplished. With a stern look at them, Hayuk interjected, "So they say that this potion is able to bring people back to life? Sounds very interesting." Andrei Ivanov looked at the blacksmith and told him to explain finally, normally, what to what. Otherwise, nothing is not clear. The artist frowned. Of course, this potion still needs further tests, but now with a single drop, it is possible to resurrect a rat. Monarch thoughtfully said that no matter how it is, but the effect of it is so far insignificant, but still. He then asked if they could produce in sufficient quantities. Chal replied that that was the problem, for manufacturing requires a lot of components. Dragon's blood, unicorn's horn, unicorn's blood, unicorn's horn, phoenix's tears, and so on requires a lot of S-class ingredients, but the monarch assured that there is no problem in this. Next, they were able to craft a weapon against the huge monsters. It was the same huge sword, more like a saw. In addition, growing tattoos that are able to increase special stats and much more. Just like the most outstanding leaders, the skills of these masters were simply superb. They did the impossible. Monarch thought that after a while, players would use their weapon as their primary weapon. He had a smile on his face, and they would only get stronger because of it. The main thing was to keep up the pace. The next destination was Romania. Several masked soldiers were already engaged in destroying the monsters. Their long arms also reached Kazakhstan and needed to expand their influence and clean up the dungeons. Another point was Morocco. There were also a lot of high-class dungeons requiring mopping up. By now, they had a real meeting room, and the monarch was asking how the expedition was going so far. It was going well. About the items were sold through private government or representative guild, so it's okay. Since they are just starting their business, the monarch ordered to keep a close eye on the stock of goods. The younger one nodded his head. In distant and cold Siberia, a group of hunters were heading through the fog. They were not badly armed, but still there was tension. The commander was encouraging his military men to work so hard. Here everything was much easier than expected. All that was left was to finish. But you shouldn't have said that before they take the castle, so they'll be the first. Suddenly, one of the squad members noticed a stirring somewhere up above and looked up. What he saw horrified him. Several gargoyles on the castle walls now flew straight at them, spreading their broad fingers. Everyone drew their weapons and prepared for battle. The monsters attacked. Too unexpectedly, we had to regroup. Inside the castle, there was a cold fog on the floor, lying many lifeless bodies of humans and monsters. Here was a real battle. The castle, which appeared in its 5th year of existence, is the most challenging hunting ground that has yet to be conquered in 20 years. Although to be precise, he didn't try to do it. Maybe he could have. Other guilds also tried to realize this long-held dream, but all failed. If you capture the Castle of Confusion, you can get anything you want. Of course, it was a rumor, but still among the players, it is known to everyone. The room was a complete mess with empty alcohol bottles on the floor and the smell of alcohol in the air. Jan Galeev climbed up on his bed and started massaging his head. He had a terrible hangover and shouldn't have experimented with alcohol after all. Turning his gaze to the side, he saw a girl lying with him. What is this all about? He didn't understand. Where did she come from? Suddenly, he was brought to his senses by Monarch Hayuk's voice, saying that if Yang was done, then let him pack up and get out quickly. The monarch added with a grin that he didn't want to see him in his mother's clothes, so let him look normal. The Russian, who had not expected anything of the sort, just clapped his eyes in surprise at what the monarch had forgotten here. After a few minutes, he was back to normal and offered his guest a cup of coffee, but the monarch was interested in the castle. Ian said that the monarch seemed to have guessed it himself, but he decided to remind him. With a smile on his face, the man winked and said he'd have to return his weapon if he wanted to know the information. Crossing his arms over his chest, the monarch replied that it would be a little hard, which shocked the man. He asked, shouldn't the castle contain items of at least comparable value to his weapons? In a serious voice, the monarch replied that this could only be judged when seen with his own eyes. Sitting down on the chair, the Russian asked, so they would not agree. Monarch replied that he would decide everything as soon as he saw the value of the items. Preventing disbelief, Hyuk asked. Isn't he the same man who always kept his words to himself? Yang couldn't help but agree. However, in return, the monarch promised him one thing. When he finished the sweep, he would report it to the Imperial Guild. There were a lot of people at Beloyarsk Airport just boarding a passenger plane. The monarch had changed clothes and was now in a tracksuit. The man was heading straight for the plane. On the way, he was thanked by everyone for his visit to me every time such an important person comes to their country. In front of him stood the representative of the vice leader of the Imperial Guild, Anton Pavlov. From now on, he would be showing the way. Hayuk interjected. His name was really Anton. It seemed that name was familiar to him. The man stopped. Hearing his name, Anton looked at the stranger with a surprised look at how he knew his name and who he was. The monarch summoned subspace, and the people standing nearby were horrified for the first time in their lives. They had seen something like this. Following that, the hero pulled out of the spatial inventory to the ring a little late, but still let it not offend. Anton's eyes rounded at this object, which was apparently familiar to him, and the man was shocked. He plunged into memories when he was in the Demon Lord's castle in the game world. Anton was then very badly wounded. Next to him lay a woman unconscious. A man glanced at her over his shoulder. Alina was badly wounded and unconscious, and Anton was furious. Suddenly a monk appeared and with one blow destroyed the monster. Unhappy Anton just watched it all from the sidelines. The hero looked at the player over his shoulder and didn't say a word. He then approached the man and asked if he was all right. Anton looked very shabby. The monarch told him to drink the recovery potion because he was on the verge of life. It was dangerous. Anton looked at the monarch and said that he was really fine and not to worry because everything was fine. In a pitiful voice, the man said that even if he continued to fight, it would only delay his end. The monarch objected, "Let him just drink." The man took a small cube out of his pocket. Apparently, it was a gift or jewelry. Looking at Alina, he said he was preparing this to propose to her if they managed to get out of here. Holding the box out to the monarch, he asked to bury the thing with his girlfriend if he could. Then the man passed out. The box opened, falling to the ground, and out of it fell that very ring with a small gemstone. Now in the real world, Anton finally realizes what's up as he sees the monarch has decided to keep the ring for himself. After waiting a bit, the hero said he should have apologized for his action. He should have. Of course he wanted to bury this thing with that girl, but suddenly a lot of monsters appeared and he had to run away. In such a situation, there was nothing he could do. Anton just looked at him without saying a word. His gaze was good-natured. Hayuk asked how they were doing. With that girl, Anton said it was fine. They're married and expecting a baby. Perhaps the monarch was late, but he should have given a wedding gift. Anton immediately started to refuse. He was embarrassed. At this time, they were already being followed by a man who tried not to show his face, but kept his eyes on them. In a luxurious room, many kilometers away, sat a man surrounded by beautiful women on a table with glasses of wine. He took a phone call, and as he talked, a smile appeared on his face. Everything went according to his plan. Meanwhile, the monarch and Anton found themselves in a forest with an oppressive atmosphere and a fog covering everything. After walking a little more, they said goodbye, and the monarchs moved into the thick of the forest, leaving Anton with his companion. He applied the passive eye ability of the Chaos Mask to see perfectly in the darkness. Now everything is visible. Soon he reached his destination. In front of him towered a huge castle, the very same castle that many had entered and never returned to. The guy turned his head and saw a creepy-looking gargoyle sitting as a decoration. The monarch already knew very well that it was better to deal with these monsters first and began to shoot his bow. Soon it was over, and the hero advanced unhindered to the entrance. He was blocked by massive doors. But it was no difficulty for the monarch. He opened the door with one mighty blow and stepped inside. There was a courtyard with many statues of famous demons. The player stopped and began to look around. It looked like an ordinary garden, so he probably just needed to enter the castle, which is what Hayuk did. He stopped in front of the door and tried to open it, but to no avail. Then the only solution was to just kick it down. The monarch launched an energy ball directly at the door. This thing should destroy it anyway. But unfortunately, nothing worked. The gate remained standing in the same position without taking a single unit of damage. His attacks didn't seem to be working at all. Monarch didn't faintly wonder how to get inside then.